unaware she was a billionaire's granddaughter. Her husband dumped her in a shelter after her baby shower, but what happened months later left him speechless. He didn't just abandon her, he delivered her. Right outside a women's shelter, under a glowing sign that made her feel branded, Brandon Knowles parked the car, opened the passenger door, and motioned like he was dropping off something he no longer wanted. Lydia Short stood there, 7 months pregnant, clutching a small bag in her worn purse while her body shook from more than cold. Behind the windshield, his mother, Agnes Eldridge, sat upright with a face that said this had been decided long before tonight. In the back seat, Vicky Bray, heels crossed, lips curled, watched Lydia like she was watching a chair being cleared for her. Brandon didn't raise his voice. That's what made it feel unreal. He leaned in just enough for Lydia to smell his cologne and hear the sentence that cut deeper than any shouting. "You're not my problem anymore." Lydia's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her phone was useless. Her cards had already stopped working hours ago. Her home was already locked to her. And the worst part, she could still hear the baby shower music in her head, like a cruel echo. Because just hours earlier, she had walked into her baby shower thinking it was a fresh start, pink ribbons, smiling faces, cameras for memories. She didn't know the microphone wasn't for games. She didn't know the envelope in Brandon's hand wasn't a toast. She didn't know Vicky wasn't a guest. Now she was standing at a shelter door, trying not to collapse, with only one strange comfort left, a heavy old ring her father once begged her never to pawn. What they didn't know, what Brandon, Agnes, and Vicky didn't even suspect, was this. Lydia wasn't just a quiet wife they could erase. She was a billionaire's granddaughter. And weeks later, when the right documents surfaced and the right screen lit up in the right room, Brandon would try to speak only to realize his voice was gone. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like standing in that parking lot and saying nothing while Lydia is left behind. Subscribe now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The plate hit the counter so hard the bread jumped. Lydia Short, 30 years old, 7 months pregnant, and trying not to shake, froze mid-breath. Her hand flew to her belly like a shield. The baby kicked once, sharp and urgent, as if even the unborn could feel when a room turned dangerous. Across the kitchen island stood Brandon Knowles, 33, her husband. He wasn't yelling. That was the worst part. His anger lived in his silence, now tight jaw, hard eyes, the kind of stare that made Lydia feel like she had done something wrong just by existing. At the edge of the room sat Agnes Eldridge, 58, Brandon's mother, a woman who treated family like a business and love like a privilege you could lose. Agnes watched Lydia the way someone studies a stain they want to scrub out. "Bread again?" Agnes muttered, voice dry with disgust. "No wonder you're like this." She didn't finish the sentence, but Lydia heard it anyway. Heavy, plain, too much, not enough. Brandon didn't correct his mother. He didn't say, "Stop talking to my wife like that." He simply looked at Lydia like she had embarrassed him with groceries. Lydia swallowed. She forced her lips into a small smile. She told herself she could carry the mood the way she carried the baby, carefully, quietly, without complaint. Because Lydia still believed patience saved marriages. Lydia had been trained for quiet love long before she met Brandon. She grew up in small rooms and smaller hopes, raised by a man she called her father, Mr. Short. A steady, tired man with rough hands who never explained why they moved so often or why her mother's name was never spoken in full. Lydia's mother died when Lydia was little old enough to remember the warmth of her arms, young enough to forget the sound of her voice. After the funeral, their life became rules. Rule 1, don't ask strangers for help. Rule 2, never brag. Rule 3 said in a voice that sounded like a warning and a prayer at the same time, we don't borrow pride from money. If Lydia asked why they lived so simply, Mr. Short would say simple was safe. If she asked why her mother never had family visiting, his face would tighten and he'd say, some families don't love, they own. Lydia didn't understand that sentence until she married Brandon. Brandon loved her at first like she was a fresh start, sweet, hardworking, grateful. He liked that she didn't demand. He liked that she didn't fight. He liked that she was easy to shape. And Lydia, starving for stability, gave him everything that proved devotion. She used her savings money she'd built from years of careful living to help Brandon pay for a professional course that boosted his career. She sold her old car, the one Mr. Short had left her, so Brandon could clear a debt that stressed him out. When Brandon insisted the lease and bills should stay in his name for credit reasons, Lydia agreed, believing marriage meant trust, not paperwork. What Lydia did keep because her father made her promise was a small jewelry box she never discussed. Inside was a heavy gold ring with a strange design. When he'd given it to her, Mr. Short had looked more serious than she'd ever seen him. Never pawn it, never trade it. If the world ever turns cold and you have nowhere to go, there's a women's shelter called Westbrook. Ask for a woman named Bertha. Show her this ring. She'll know what to do. Lydia had laughed nervously back then. It sounded dramatic. She thought he was just scared she'd end up poor and alone. She never imagined the ring was part of a plan quietly written years ago, an identity buried on purpose, protected by law, locked behind DNA confirmation and conditions. A protective trust existed in her name, set to open fully when she turned 35, or early, if legal proof ever showed she'd been stripped of safety and support. She didn't know that. All she knew was she had married into a family that now looked at her like she was a mistake. Lydia turned back to the table and folded baby clothes, one tiny onesie at a time, smoothing each piece like it could smooth her life too. The nursery bag sat open nearby. She had been packing quietly, humming earlier, trying to keep her heart calm for the baby. But Brandon's presence had changed the air. He watched her from the doorway the way a manager watches an employee who keeps messing up. He used to touch her belly and smile. Now he mostly stared at his phone, as if something inside it mattered more than the life Lydia was carrying. Agnes didn't pretend to be kind anymore. She didn't need to. "You're always eating," Agnes said, eyes narrowing. "Then you wonder why you look tired." Lydia felt heat rise in her cheeks. She told herself not to react. Reacting gave Agnes power. Brandon finally spoke, low and cold. "Don't start drama, Lydia. Just don't embarrass me." Embarrass him, like her pregnancy was a public mistake. Like her body was a shameful project. Lydia opened her mouth, maybe to say she wasn't trying to embarrass anyone, maybe to ask what had changed, but the words died when Brandon's phone buzzed. He checked it fast. Turned the screen away. Lydia noticed anyway, the quick movement, the guarded posture, the way his eyes hardened, like the message had reminded him of something he wanted. She told herself not to imagine things, not to accuse, not to become the too emotional woman Agnes wanted her to be. Still, the baby kicked again, and Lydia's stomach tightened with a quiet, creeping warning. She remembered being 16, crying over a school friend who suddenly stopped talking to her. "Mr. Short had looked at her for a long time and said, "Some people keep you around only while you're useful. The moment you become inconvenient, they'll act like you never mattered." Lydia had hated that sentence. Now it came back like a bruise you forgot you had until someone pressed it. That night, when Agnes went to the guest room and Brandon disappeared into the hallway with his phone, Lydia quietly opened her jewelry box. Her fingers found the ring, heavy, cold, strange. She held it in her palm and felt foolish for needing comfort from metal. From the hallway, Agnes's voice drifted through the house, soft enough to be private, sharp enough to cut. "She's a liability," Agnes whispered to Brandon. "And once the baby comes, she'll be dead weight." There was a pause. Then Brandon's voice, quieter, agreeing without saying it outright. Lydia's breath caught. Her hand tightened around the ring. Brandon's phone buzzed again, closer this time. Lydia stepped into the hall before she could stop herself. She saw the name on the screen for half a second before Brandon's thumb covered it. Vicky. Brandon's face changed instantly, less irritation, more focus, like the message had purpose, like it was instructions. Agnes appeared behind him, eyes bright with a private satisfaction that made Lydia's skin go cold. "Answer," Agnes murmured. "Don't keep her waiting." Lydia stood there pregnant and silent, realizing something that made her throat go dry. This wasn't a marriage drifting apart. This was a plan unfolding, and the next person who stepped into their home wouldn't be a guest. She would be a replacement. Soon Lydia wouldn't just see that name on a screen. She would see Vicky Bray sitting where Lydia belonged. The front door opened without a knock. Lydia's whole body went still. The baby kicked hard, like a warning bell inside her. She was standing in the living room with a folded blanket in her hands when she heard heels, sharp, confident clicks moving across the floor, like the person already belonged there. Brandon didn't look surprised. That was the first punch. Agnes didn't even stand up. That was the second. Then the woman stepped into view. Vicky Bray, 32. Polished, slim, and smiling like she had already won, walked in wearing a fitted coat that looked expensive and a confidence that felt even more costly. She wasn't a friend, she wasn't a cousin, she wasn't anyone Lydia had ever met. But Vicky looked around Lydia's home as if she was inspecting a purchase. Lydia's mouth went dry. Brandon had said it would be a quick work thing, just paperwork, just a meeting, nothing personal. Yet Vicky's eyes landed on Lydia's belly and didn't soften. They sharpened, amused. "Oh," Vicky said lightly, as if she had just noticed a decoration. "So, you're really close." Lydia turned to Brandon, waiting for him to explain, waiting for him to look ashamed. He only adjusted his shirt and cleared his throat like he was the one being inconvenienced. "This is Vicky," Brandon said. His voice was calm, almost proud. "She's helping with business strategy, cleaning things up, cleaning, helping." Lydia had never heard those words inside her home before. Agnes finally spoke from her seat, voice smooth as a knife. "Don't stand there like a statue, Lydia. Offer her something. Offer her something." Like Vicky was a guest. Lydia's fingers tightened around the blanket. Politeness was the only armor she'd ever been taught. "Hi," Lydia managed. "Nice to meet you." Vicky smiled wider, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure it is." Lydia told herself not to panic. This could still be normal. Business people came and went. Brandon had been busy lately. Maybe this was just that, but nothing about the room felt normal. Brandon stayed close to Vicky, not Lydia. His body angled toward the other woman like that was where his attention lived now. And Agnes watched Lydia the way a supervisor watches a worker about to be replaced. Lydia saw it in the small things. Vicky didn't ask before she sat down. She chose the seat Lydia always used near Brandon, near the center. She crossed her legs slowly, as if she were settling into position. When Lydia moved toward her own seat, Agnes tapped the chair lightly with her fingers. "Let her sit there," Agnes said. "You can take the side." The side. Like Lydia was staff. Brandon didn't protest. He didn't say, "That's my wife's chair." He didn't even look at Lydia's face. He just said, "Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine." Lydia repeated it in her head like a prayer. Her heart beat too fast, like her body understood what her mind refused to accept. Vicky began talking about Brandon's work with an easy, practiced tone, like she belonged inside his life. "Your expenses are messy," Vicky said, pulling out a thin folder. "Some inefficiencies, some drains. Drains." Lydia heard the word and felt her stomach tighten. Vicky flipped a page and pointed at something. Brandon leaned closer to see, close enough that Lydia could smell Vicky's perfume from across the room. Agnes smiled like she was watching a performance she'd paid for. Lydia tried to make sense of it. She had supported Brandon. She had saved money for him. She had sacrificed. She had stayed quiet when he snapped. She had smiled through his distance. Wasn't that what devotion meant? Then Vicky said, in that same casual voice, "A lot of the spending patterns, they're emotional, not strategic. If you want investors to respect you, we have to remove that noise." Her eyes flicked to Lydia. The insult was gentle, dressed in professional words, but Lydia felt it land like a slap. Brandon nodded. "That's what I've been saying." Lydia's throat tightened. "He's been saying? Saying what about her?" Agnes leaned forward, voice dripping with fake concern. "Lydia doesn't understand how pressure works. She thinks life is feelings." Lydia's cheeks warmed with shame. She wanted to defend herself. She wanted to say she had been the one holding this home together while Brandon chased status. But the room was built against her. And the baby kicked again, hard, like it was demanding she protect them. Vicky wasn't loud. That was what made her dangerous. She spoke in numbers and reports. She used words like audit, risk, financial hygiene. She made it sound official, like Lydia's existence could be measured and reduced. Vicky glanced around the living room. "This space could be optimized too," she said, smiling. "Less clutter, less softness, softness." Lydia knew she meant her. Brandon laughed, a short laugh that cut. "You should see how she packs baby stuff, like we're opening a daycare." He used to smile at the baby clothes. He used to hold them up and joke about tiny socks. Now he made her joy sound stupid. Agnes added quietly, "He needs a partner who won't hold him back. Someone who understands the numbers." Partner. Lydia's fingers trembled. Her father's ring flashed through her mind, heavy and cold. Mr. Short's voice echoed too. "We don't borrow pride from money. But in this house, pride came from status. And Lydia was being treated like a liability. Vicky's gaze dropped to Lydia's belly again. Her lips curved just slightly, and she leaned toward Agnes as if Lydia wasn't even there. "Once the baby comes," Vicky murmured, soft enough to feel private but loud enough for Lydia to catch. "She'll be too tired to push back on anything." "That's when we finalize the changes." Agnes didn't react with shock. She nodded once, slow and certain, like the plan had already been written. Brandon's phone buzzed. He checked it and smirked like something was moving forward exactly as expected. Lydia felt her heart sink. Too tired to push back on what? Vicky stood, smoothing her coat like she was preparing to leave or preparing to return whenever she wanted. Before walking out, she turned back and looked Lydia up and down, calm and cruel. "For success," Vicky said lightly, voice sweet as poison. "Some people have to be removed." Brandon didn't correct her. Agnes smiled. And Lydia realized, with a cold rush, that this wasn't just an affair hiding in shadows. This was a takeover happening in her face. Brandon reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. His grip was firm, his expression flat like he had practiced this in a mirror. He set the envelope on the table. Not for Vicky, for Lydia. Lydia's eyes locked onto it, breath caught, stomach tight, because she didn't need to open it to feel what it was. At the baby shower they were planning, that envelope wouldn't stay private. It would become a spectacle. The microphone screamed. A high, ugly squeal cut through the hotel function room just as Lydia stepped inside, so sharp it made her flinch and press her palm to her belly. The baby jolted, startled too. Cameras flashed at the same time, bright bursts of light that made Lydia blink like she'd walked into a stage, not a celebration. For half a second she couldn't breathe. Then she saw the decorations, pink ribbons, balloons, shiny welcome baby letters, and forced her lungs to work again. "It's just a baby shower," she told herself. "It's supposed to be happy." But the way people looked at her didn't feel happy. It felt curious, waiting, like they were watching a show that hadn't started yet. Lydia's eyes searched the crowd until she found Brandon. He stood near the front, close to the microphone stand, one hand on a thick envelope. His grip was too tight. His shoulders were too stiff. He looked like a man holding something heavy that wasn't paper. Agnes was near him, calm and perfectly dressed, scanning the room the way she scanned Lydia's life, like she was checking if everything was in place. And then Lydia saw her. Vicky. Not hiding, not sneaking, just standing there near the gift table like she belonged next to the family. She wore a soft smile that felt sharp underneath, and her eyes lingered on Lydia's belly for a beat too long. Lydia's stomach tightened. So this wasn't a simple celebration. This was an event. Lydia tried to steady herself. She kept her face gentle. She walked forward slowly, one careful step at a time, because her body was heavy and the room felt heavier. She told herself Brandon had invited Vicky because of work. She told herself Agnes was acting strange because Agnes was always strange. She told herself the envelope was probably paperwork. Anything was easier than the truth forming in her chest. A hand touched Lydia's elbow. Marion Blackburn, 29. Lydia's friend from a prenatal support group stood beside her with worried eyes. Marion wasn't family, but she had become the kind of person Lydia trusted, the kind who looked at her like she mattered. Marion leaned close, voice low. "Are you okay? You look pale." Lydia tried to smile. "Don't ruin the day," she warned herself. "Don't be emotional. Don't give them a reason." "I'm fine," Lydia said, even though her throat felt tight. Marion's eyes drifted past Lydia to Brandon and Agnes. "This doesn't feel like a normal baby shower." Lydia's heart thumped faster. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. The room was filled with people Lydia barely knew, some of Brandon's co-workers, a few older relatives who usually ignored her, and strangers holding phones like they were ready to record anything. Why were there so many cameras? Lydia's gaze landed on a man with a professional camera rig near the back. He wasn't a guest. He'd been hired. Agnes had arranged this. Of course she had. Joy had been invited, but dread had been seated first. Agnes approached with a bright smile that never warmed her eyes. "There you are," Agnes said, loud enough for others to hear. "Don't stand in the doorway. People are waiting to see you." Waiting. Not celebrating. Waiting. Agnes guided Lydia forward with a firm hand at her back, steering her like she was a prop. Lydia's gaze flicked around for a chair, her chair, the seat she expected near Brandon. It was taken. Vicky sat there with her legs crossed, relaxed, amused, holding a glass, like she was the guest of honor. Lydia stopped walking. Agnes didn't stop. She leaned in and murmured, still smiling, "Take the side seat, Lydia. Don't make things awkward." The side seat was near the wall, closer to the serving table than to Brandon. Not a place for the mother to be. A place for someone who didn't matter. Lydia felt heat rise behind her eyes. She fought it down. She lowered herself into the side seat slowly, carefully. Marion sat close, protective. Brandon didn't come over. He stayed near the microphone. Vicky leaned toward Agnes, her voice low but not low enough. "Good. She'll sit where she belongs." Lydia's fingers curled around the edge of her chair. Agnes had designed this like a performance. Public, recorded, unavoidable. There was a schedule, games, speeches, photos. The microphone wasn't there for fun. It was there for control. The cameras weren't there for memories. They were there for a version of the story, just not the one Lydia would have wanted. Agnes clapped her hands. "Everyone, we're going to do a toast." The crowd turned toward Brandon instantly, like they already knew he would speak. Lydia's pulse pounded in her ears. Marion whispered, "Why is he holding that envelope?" Lydia didn't answer because she couldn't. Across the room, Vicky rose smoothly and walked toward Brandon like she was meant to stand beside him. She didn't ask permission. She didn't hesitate. She took her place. Agnes stepped behind them, perfectly positioned, close enough to guide, far enough to look supportive. Lydia tried to catch Brandon's eyes. Just one glance, one sign he was still her husband. But Brandon stared at the microphone like it was the only thing that mattered. Brandon tapped the microphone. A dull thud echoed in the speakers. Silence fell, thick and heavy. Then Brandon spoke, calm as ice. "She's been stealing from me," he said. Lydia's breath stopped. The room gasped. Brandon lifted the envelope slightly, as if it proved something. "We did an internal audit at home. The numbers don't lie." Lydia's ears rang. "Audit? What audit?" She didn't even have access to his accounts. Brandon had insisted everything stay in his name. Vicky stepped closer, shoulder nearly touching Brandon's, claiming space, claiming him. Agnes moved to the cake table and placed something on top of the frosting, like a decoration. Papers. Lydia recognized the shape before she understood. Divorce papers. Agnes smiled at the crowd. "It's time for my son to be free of this burden," she said, like she was talking about trash, not a person. Lydia couldn't move. Marion's hand gripped Lydia's arm. "Lydia, what is this?" Lydia's mouth opened, but no sound came. Then Lydia's chair scraped suddenly. Someone behind her pulled it back fast enough to make her jolt. Her heart slammed. The baby kicked hard. Lydia turned, panicked, and saw two venue security guards stepping in from the side, quiet, trained, already instructed. Brandon didn't look at Lydia with regret. He looked at her like a problem he had finally decided to remove. Lydia stood slowly, trembling, one hand on her belly, the other reaching instinctively toward her purse where her father's heavy ring sat hidden inside, cold against the lining. Brandon's voice cut through the silence again. "Escort her out," he said. Security stepped closer. Marion moved in front of Lydia without thinking, brave and terrified at the same time. "You can't throw her out, she's pregnant." One of the guards spoke low, apologetic. "Ma'am, the event organizer says you need to leave. We're just following orders." Lydia realized in one horrifying flash that Brandon wasn't going to stop, he was going to finish. And while the crowd watched her fall, Lydia didn't know something else was already being taken from her, something that would make the night outside feel even colder. The card reader beeped once, then flashed declined in bright red letters. Lydia's stomach dropped so fast it felt like the floor moved. She stood at the small payment booth near the hotel parking exit, still shaking from being forced out of her own baby shower, still hearing the crowd's gasps in her ears. Her hands trembled as she pushed the card forward again, desperate, like the machine might suddenly grow mercy. The attendant's eyes softened with pity. "It's not going through." Lydia tried a second card, another beep, another denial. Outside, the wind felt too sharp for her skin. One of the security guards lingered near the doors, watching like she was a problem that hadn't been fully removed yet. Lydia's phone buzzed. A message from Brandon. "Brandon, don't use the cards. I canceled everything. Canceled. Not paused, not frozen, canceled. Lydia's throat tightened until she couldn't swallow. The baby kicked hard, like it was protesting the panic rising in her body. She clutched her belly and forced air into her lungs. She needed to leave. She needed to go home. Even if it was humiliating, even if it meant begging, at least home had a bed. She started toward the street to call a taxi. Before she could raise her arm, Brandon's black car rolled up like a shadow. The window lowered halfway. His face was calm, too calm. In the passenger seat sat Agnes, watching Lydia with that same cold satisfaction, like the day had gone exactly as planned. In the back seat, legs crossed, lipstick perfect, Vicky stared out the window, as if Lydia was a stranger on the street. Lydia's heart slammed. This wasn't help. This was the next step. Brandon got out. One of the security guards moved with him, more out of habit than threat, then stopped when Brandon waved him off. The guard stepped back toward the hotel. Brandon spoke without warmth. "Get in." Lydia's lips parted. She wanted to ask, "Where are we going?" She wanted to ask, "Why are you doing this?" She wanted to ask how a man who once promised to protect her could look at her like she was unwanted furniture. But Brandon's eyes warned her not to speak. Agnes clicked her tongue. "Don't stand there. People are watching." Cars slowed. Someone lifted a phone. Lydia's cheeks burned with shame that wasn't hers. The baby shifted again. Fear swallowed her pride. She didn't want a scene, not because she was weak, but because she was protecting the life inside her. So she got in. The car smelled like expensive air freshener and control. Lydia sat in the front passenger seat. Agnes sat upright beside Brandon, in the front, like a supervisor overseeing a delivery. Vicky lounged in the back seat, legs crossed, as if this was a victory ride. Brandon drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, jaw tight. No one spoke for a long minute. The silence was loud enough to bruise. Lydia stared at her hands. She tried to keep her breathing steady. She tried to remember she was still a person, still a wife, still a mother-to-be. She tried to summon the old Brandon, the one who used to laugh softly when she mispronounced a word, the one who once said he liked that she didn't care about status. But the Brandon driving now didn't look like that man. Agnes broke the silence first. "You should have listened when we told you to stop acting like you belong." Belong where her own marriage? Vicky leaned forward slightly, voice smooth and sweet in the way poison can be sweet. "This is what happens when you're emotional instead of useful." Useful. The word hit Lydia like an insult dressed as truth. Brandon finally spoke, still not looking at her. "You brought this on yourself." Lydia's eyes stung. She didn't even know what this was supposed to be. She had folded baby clothes. She had loved him. She had stayed faithful. She had tried to keep peace. What crime had devotion become in this house? Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Brandon, sent earlier, appeared when she checked the screen. "Brandon, don't try to go back to the house." Lydia turned her head slowly. "The house?" Brandon's voice stayed flat. "Locks were changed this afternoon." Changed. A simple sentence that meant, you have no door, you have no room, you have no place. In her mind, Lydia saw Vicky walking through the room she had cleaned, touching the baby things Lydia had bought, sitting where Lydia had sat. The thought made her stomach twist. Vicky smiled like she could hear Lydia thinking, "It's a nice place," she said casually. "I can see why you tried so hard to keep it." Agnes gave a small approving nod, like Vicky had said something clever. Lydia's hands curled into fists. Her father's ring, still tucked in her purse, pressed cold against the lining, as if reminding her not to collapse. The car turned onto a worn street with old buildings. No gates, no security cameras protecting wealth, no polished windows, just cracked sidewalks and tired signs. Brandon parked in front of a building with a simple lit sign, Westbrook Women's Shelter. The letters glowed against the dark like a label she couldn't wash off. Lydia's breath left her body in one silent rush. Westbrook. The name hit something deep in her memory, her father's voice, years ago. "If the world ever turns cold, there's a women's shelter called Westbrook. Ask for a woman named Bertha. Show her the ring." She had never really believed she'd need that sentence. Now she was staring at the sign. Brandon got out, walked around, and opened her door like he was dropping off a package. Lydia stayed seated, frozen. Agnes leaned forward from the back seat, voice low and final. "This is where you belong until you learn." Vicky laughed softly under her breath, then looked away like Lydia wasn't worth eye contact anymore. Lydia whispered, barely audible, "Brandon, please." Brandon didn't flinch at please. He didn't soften at the sight of her belly. He just reached into the car, grabbed her small bag from the floor, and tossed it onto the sidewalk. Then he said the coldest words he had ever spoken to her, words that didn't shake with anger, because he meant them. "You're not my problem anymore." Lydia's face burned. Her eyes blurred. She forced herself out of the car on her own. One careful step, then another. She would not give them the satisfaction of dragging her. Brandon didn't wait to see if she got inside safely. He didn't ask if she had eaten. He didn't ask if the baby was okay. He closed the door, got back into the driver's seat, and drove off with Agnes and Vicky like he had just erased Lydia from his life. Lydia stood on the sidewalk holding her bag, staring at the shelter doors. Her legs felt weak, her heart felt empty, and still the baby kicked, stubborn and alive. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and exhaustion. A few women sat quietly in chairs, eyes tired, hands clasped. A baby cried somewhere down the hall. The sound hit Lydia in the chest. A woman behind the intake desk looked up. She had kind eyes that had seen too much. Her name tag read, Bertha Gates. Bertha spoke gently. "Honey, are you safe tonight?" Lydia tried to answer, but only a breath came out. Bertha stood and guided Lydia toward a chair. Careful, respectful, no judgment, no sarcasm, no smirk. That simple kindness almost broke Lydia more than the cruelty had. Lydia reached into her purse for a tissue and felt something slip free, metal, heavy, cold. The ring. It hit the floor with a soft clink. Bertha bent down to pick it up. The moment her fingers touched it, her expression changed. Not just curiosity, recognition. Bertha looked at Lydia slowly, voice suddenly quieter, like the building itself needed to listen. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Lydia stared at the ring in Bertha's hand, confused and numb, not understanding why her father's old promise suddenly mattered. Bertha didn't push. She looked at the ring again, thumb tracing the strange crest engraved into it. Then she said, almost to herself, she was telling the truth. Bertha slipped the ring gently back into Lydia's palm, then reached for the phone on her desk and pulled out a worn business card from her pocket, the card she had carried for years, waiting for a girl who might never come. "Sit tight, sweetheart," Bertha said softly. "There's someone your mother wanted called if this day ever came." Lydia felt a chill crawl up her spine. Quiet foreshadowing hint. Next scene. Because Bertha wasn't calling a random number, she was about to connect Lydia to people who had been preparing for this moment for years. The phone rang once. Twice. Lydia held it so tight her fingers ached. Her breath came shallow, like the shelter air was too thin for someone who had just been erased from her own life. Across the intake desk, Bertha watched her with a new kind of seriousness, one hand resting near the old ring on the blotter as if touching it had awakened something dangerous and important at the same time. The ring had been her father's warning. Now it felt like a key. They were in a small office off the main hallway, away from the noise. It was the next morning. Lydia had spent the night in a narrow bed, waking every hour to the sound of strange doors and distant crying. The baby had rolled and kicked through the night, as if reminding her, "Don't disappear." As soon as Bertha started her shift, she had brought Lydia straight here. "Call," Bertha said gently, but her eyes didn't look gentle anymore. They looked certain. "You need to hear this from them, not from me." Lydia hesitated. Her mind kept flashing back to Brandon's cold face at the curb, the shelter sign, Vicky's smirk, Agnes's satisfied silence. She had been dropped here like trash. Now this ring, this one thing her father begged her never to pawn, had turned the room into something else. Lydia pressed the call button on the number written on Bertha's card. The ringing sounded too loud in the quiet office. Then someone answered. A man's voice, low and careful. "Hello?" Lydia's throat tightened. I was told to call this number." A pause. A breath. Then the voice changed, still controlled, but sharper with focus, like he had been waiting for this moment longer than he wanted to admit. "You're Lydia Short," the man said, not as a question, but as recognition. "Yes?" Lydia went still. The baby kicked once, hard, like the truth had touched them both. "Yes," Lydia whispered. "Who are you?" "My name is Samuel Dillon," he said. "I'm a private investigator for an estate law firm. And you've been missing from a very powerful family's records. Lydia felt her blood turn cold. Missing. Powerful family. She looked at Bertha, confused, almost angry. Bertha didn't look away. She looked like she had just watched a door open that Lydia didn't even know existed. Lydia lowered herself into the chair beside the desk, slow and careful, because her legs were shaking. Her free hand moved to her belly, steadying herself like she could steady the world. Samuel's voice stayed calm, professional. This was a man trained to deliver information without emotion. Maybe he had to be. Maybe people like him handled lives like paperwork. I work for an estate attorney, Samuel said. We represent a family that set up a protection trust years ago. I need you to listen carefully. Estate. Lydia almost laughed, but nothing came out. An estate had nothing to do with her life. She had been raised on thrift stores and quiet rules. She had been taught to survive without asking for help. The word estate belonged to other people. I think you've made a mistake, Lydia said. My father? Samuel interrupted gently, like he'd heard this exact line before. The man who raised you may not be the man who fathered you. Lydia's chest tightened like someone had pressed down on her ribs. The room tilted in a way that made her grip the phone harder. Bertha slid a cup of water toward her. Lydia didn't drink it. Her eyes stayed on the ring on the desk. Samuel continued. That ring. You have it. That confirms something we've been trying to confirm for years. It was my father's, Lydia said quietly. Exactly, Samuel replied. He was part of the safety plan. Go damn, safety plan. Lydia stared at the wall behind Bertha like it might explain what her life had been hiding. Her mind flashed back to Mr. Short's strange warnings. Some families don't love, they own. The way he moved them. The way he never spoke about Lydia's mother's past. Lydia's voice shook. Why would anyone need a safety plan for me? Samuel's pause was short but heavy. Because your mother ran, he said, and the family she ran from doesn't lose track of blood. Lydia's breath caught. Her mother had never been described as someone who ran. She had always been spoken of like a fragile memory, like a sad story, not a woman fleeing something powerful. Who are they? Lydia whispered. Samuel didn't say the name yet. He didn't rush. He sounded like he knew this truth could crack someone open if dropped too fast. A wealthy family, he said carefully. Your grandfather is alive. He is extremely well known. And you are his biological granddaughter. Lydia's throat tightened so much she couldn't speak. Granddaughter. Her mind fought it instantly. No, that was impossible. That was movie stuff, not Lydia's life. But her body reacted before her logic could. She started shaking. Samuel's voice lowered, quieter now, as if he understood she was hanging over a cliff. Your mother made a legal request years ago, he explained. She asked that the family never approach you directly while you were young. She wanted you to grow up away from all of it. Lydia's eyes stung. So they just agreed? They didn't agree because they were kind, Samuel said. They agreed because she forced it into the trust documents. She created conditions, DNA confirmation, age requirements, and a protective fund. There it was again, a trust. Samuel continued, most of the main trust stays locked until you turn 35. That was your mother's rule. But she added early release triggers for your safety moments where we're allowed to step in sooner if your life becomes dangerous. Lydia swallowed. What kind of triggers? Another pause. Then Samuel said it plainly. Financial abandonment by a spouse, he said. Documented public humiliation can also qualify. When Bertha called and explained what happened to you last night, and then confirmed the ring, it activated the protection clause. Legally, we're required to contact you. Lydia's whole body went cold. Last night, the baby shower, the microphone, the accusation. The divorce papers on the cake, the cards canceled, the locks changed, the shelter. It wasn't just cruelty, it was the exact kind of danger her mother had feared. Lydia's hand moved to her belly, and her eyes filled. Not because she was happy, not because she felt saved, because she suddenly understood something that made her heart ache. Her mother had tried to protect her from a world Lydia didn't even know existed. Mr. Short had guarded her like a secret, and now, the moment Lydia was thrown away, the secret had opened its eyes. Samuel's voice stayed firm. Lydia, listen to me. This doesn't give you revenge. Lydia's lips parted. She didn't even know she had been hoping for revenge. She had only been hoping to survive the night. It gives you truth, Samuel said. And truth is powerful, but dangerous if you use it carelessly. Dangerous. Lydia looked at Bertha. Bertha nodded once, subtle, like she understood exactly what Samuel meant. Why are you telling me now? Lydia asked. Because until Bertha's call, Samuel said, we couldn't legally reach out. The trust forbade direct contact until age 35 unless those emergency triggers were proven. What happened to you and the shelter intake notes Bertha sent met those triggers? A few weeks ago, our internal monitors flagged unusual movements in your household accounts, Samuel added. We sent a preliminary letter to the address we had on file, nothing detailed, just a notice to contact us. But you clearly never saw it. Now, after what happened last night, we're allowed to speak to you directly. Lydia's mind flashed to Brandon's face as he drove away, to Agnes smiling, to Vicky sitting in Lydia's place. They thought she was nothing. They treated her like nothing. And Lydia had let them because she didn't know she had any other options. She stared down at her belly, feeling her baby move, slow and steady now. She whispered, barely audible, "Then let's tell it right." Bertha exhaled softly, like she'd been holding her breath. Samuel's voice sharpened again. Good. Because the next step is evidence. I need you to remember everything. Names, times, witnesses, anything you saw, anything you heard. My firm will send a family law attorney to you today. You won't be doing this alone. Evidence. Lydia swallowed. Her fear didn't disappear. It shifted shape. It became focus. Samuel spoke one final line that made Lydia's skin prickle. One more thing, he said. If they threw you away this fast, it means they're hiding something bigger than an affair. Lydia's heart thumped hard. Samuel's voice lowered. Brandon and the woman you saw, Vicky, have already moved money into outside accounts. What they did at the baby shower wasn't the first attack. Lydia's mouth went dry. The baby kicked again, like it had heard the word attack and understood it meant danger. Lydia stared at the ring on the desk, suddenly terrified of how much power could be attached to one piece of metal. Outside the little office, the shelter hallway stayed quiet. But Lydia felt it the invisible shift in the world. Like someone out there had just realized Lydia was no longer alone. Quiet foreshadowing, hint, next scene. And the very next step would not be a screaming confrontation, but a silent investigation that turned her pain into proof. The folder hit the table like a judge's gavel. Lydia flinched, not from fear this time, but from the weight of what she was about to see. It was 3 days after Brandon had dumped her at the shelter. 3 days of thin mattresses, shared bathrooms, and nurses telling her to rest while her mind refused to sleep. 3 days since Bertha handed her a phone and a ring and connected her to a man named Samuel Dillon. Now Lydia sat in the shelter's small conference room, the lights humming overhead, the distant sound of doors closing down the hall. It was late after dinner, after the shared showers, after the other women tried to sleep, but Lydia couldn't sleep. Her hand rested on her belly, protective and steady. The baby moved slowly, as if listening too. Across from her sat Samuel Dillon, the private investigator she'd spoken to on the phone. He looked tired but focused like this. Wasn't his first time watching someone learn their life had been dismantled on purpose. Next to him sat Patrice Braun, a family law attorney with a calm face and sharp eyes. Patrice wasn't warm in a sweet way. She was warm in a safe way. The kind of person who didn't panic because panic was useless. Patrice slid a pen toward Lydia. "Before you look," she said gently, "I need you to understand something." Lydia swallowed. "What?" Patrice didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She just stated it like a fact. "This isn't only betrayal," Patrice said. "This is a pattern. A pattern." Lydia's chest tightened. Brandon hadn't just left her. He designed her fall. Samuel opened the folder, and Lydia's world sharpened into numbers, dates, and proof. Lydia didn't rush revenge. She learned. That was the first decision she made that belonged only to her. Samuel had told her on the phone, "Truth is powerful but dangerous if used carelessly." Patrice had told her, "The court doesn't care how you felt, it cares what you can prove." So Lydia did what she had always done to survive. She became careful. During the last 3 days, she had met with a nurse and a counselor at the shelter, eaten what she could, and tried not to fall apart. At the same time, Samuel had been working quietly in the background. Bertha had faxed the shelter intake notes and a signed release. Lydia had signed an authorization so Samuel and Patrice could pull any records tied to her name and marriage. The estate law firm had used its resources to move fast, faster than Brandon expected anyone could move. Now Samuel spoke slowly, laying facts down like bricks. "He didn't just abandon you," he said. "He robbed you." Lydia stared at him, her mouth dry. Robbed. That word sounded too criminal for something that happened inside a marriage. But then Samuel turned the first page. The documents weren't dramatic. That was what made them terrifying. Patrice tapped the line items with her finger. "Look at the dates. Not random. Planned." Lydia's eyes moved across the page. Transfers. Withdrawals. The amounts weren't small. They were deliberate, done in chunks, just small enough to avoid automatic alerts. Lydia remembered Brandon acting stressed those weeks, snapping at her for buying baby wipes, telling her to budget better, making her feel guilty for wanting a second pack of tiny socks. He had made her feel like a burden while he emptied the ground under her feet. Samuel slid a second page forward. "This is where it went." Lydia's breath caught. The account names looked harmless, like consulting firms, like business services, but Samuel had traced ownership. "Her name doesn't appear on the top line," Samuel said, "but it shows up in the registration filings, signatures, authorizations." "That's Vicky." Patrice's voice stayed calm. "That matters, because it shows intent." Intent? Rage rose in Lydia. Not loud rage, clean rage. The kind that didn't scream. The kind that moved quietly toward justice. Samuel pulled out printed emails and spreadsheets. Lydia saw her own name written like a crime. Irregular spending, unapproved transfers, emotional purchases. Her stomach turned. "That's why Brandon said the audit confirmed it at the baby shower," Patrice explained. "They created their own proof. A script. The microphone. The cameras. The speech. They hadn't been reacting to Lydia. They had been performing against her." Patrice placed another paper in front of Lydia. A written statement with Agnes's signature, claiming she had personally seen Lydia take funds and heard Lydia admit to misusing money. Lydia's hands tightened into fists. "She lied," Lydia whispered. "Or she signed what someone else drafted," Patrice said. "Either way, she attached her name to fraud," Samuel added quietly. "And she did it to protect Brandon and Vicky. Or to protect the image she wanted for her son. To protect them." Lydia thought of Agnes whispering, "Liability. Dead weight." Agnes hadn't just disliked Lydia. She had wanted Lydia erased. Patrice slid a notebook toward Lydia. "Now it's your turn." Lydia blinked. Patrice's voice softened just slightly. "You lived it. The court needs your timeline, and Samuel needs your details. You will help build the case." Lydia stared down at the blank page. For a moment she felt like she couldn't breathe, like writing it would make it real all over again. But she picked up the pen anyway. She wrote, "Baby shower date, who was present, what Brandon said, where Agnes stood, where Vicky stood." The moment security approached the text, "Don't use the cards." I canceled everything. The text, "Don't try to go back to the house." The drive, the shelter sign, the ring falling, Bertha's face, she wrote until her hand cramped. Samuel watched without interrupting, like he respected that this wasn't just evidence. It was Lydia taking her life back line by line. Near the end of the folder, Lydia noticed a photo that made her breath catch. A security camera still. A trash bin behind the house she was no longer allowed to enter. A hand dropping something into it. The image was grainy, but the object was clear. A burned envelope, edges black, seal half melted. Samuel tapped the printout. "We pulled this from a neighbor's outdoor camera," he said. "The camera covers the alley behind your old place." Lydia leaned closer, heart pounding. Her name was faintly visible on the envelope, and the seal, an embossed mark, looked expensive, official, old. It matched the crest on her ring. Lydia's fingers went cold. "Why would an estate send me anything?" she whispered. Patrice's eyes narrowed. "Because they were trying to reach you, and somebody didn't want you to get it." Samuel's voice lowered. "This was dated several weeks before the baby shower. Someone intercepted it and tried to destroy it." Lydia's mind flashed to Vicky's confident smile. The way she walked through Lydia's home like a buyer. The way she said, "Some people have to be removed." Lydia swallowed hard. Vicky didn't just want Brandon. Vicky wanted whatever Brandon believed Lydia didn't have, and she had burned evidence to keep Lydia powerless. Patrice closed the folder slowly and looked Lydia in the eyes. "I can file for divorce and emergency protection," Patrice said. "Abandonment, financial abuse, fraud. If we do this right, you won't just walk away, you'll expose them." "Expose." Samuel leaned forward, voice tight. "There's one more problem. Whoever burned that envelope understood what the seal meant." Lydia's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" Samuel didn't soften it. "It means Vicky may already know you're connected to a very wealthy estate. Even if she doesn't know the full story, she knows enough to be dangerous." Lydia's stomach dropped. The baby kicked once hard, sudden. Patrice's voice went quiet, serious. "We need to confirm who you are on paper. DNA test. Chain of custody. Once that result comes back, they won't just be facing your word, they'll be facing your name." Lydia stared at the burned seal on the photo, heart racing. Because if someone had tried this hard to keep a letter from her, then the truth inside it could change everything. And when the lab results finally arrive, the sentence at the top of the page will overturn everything Lydia thought she knew about herself. The lab results are back. Samuel's voice cut through the small shelter meeting room like a blade. Lydia's pen stopped mid-line. Her hand went to her belly without thinking, protective and steady at the same time. The baby shifted, slow but firm, like it felt the room tighten. Patrice didn't speak yet. She just slid a sealed packet across the table toward Lydia. It wasn't the kind of envelope that held ordinary news. It had weight. It carried the same embossed crest she'd seen on the burned envelope photo and on her ring. The estate seal. Lydia's throat went dry. This wasn't shelter gossip. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a door opening. Samuel's eyes stayed on Lydia's face. He looked like a man who had seen people crumble at truths like this. "Before you open it," he said, "you need to know it answers the biggest question." Lydia's fingers trembled as she broke the seal. The first page was clinical names, codes, chain of custody notes. Patrice had insisted on that part. Everything had to be clean, provable, usable later. A nurse at the shelter had taken Lydia's DNA swab under witness. The sample had been delivered to a certified lab. No shortcuts. Then Lydia's eyes landed on one line. DNA, match confirmed. Her heart stuttered. She pressed her palm to her belly. The baby kicked once, sharp. Lydia's breath caught like she had been punched from the inside. Patrice's voice came softly, steady. "It's confirmed, Lydia." Samuel added, lower, almost careful. "You are who the records say you are." Lydia's lips parted, but no sound came out. For a moment, Lydia couldn't feel the chair under her. She couldn't hear the hallway noise. She only heard her father's voice, "Mister." Short so clear it felt like he was standing behind her. "We don't borrow pride from money." She used to think that rule was about being humble. Now she wondered if it was about staying hidden. Her mind pulled up old scenes like broken film clips. Her father moving them quietly whenever someone asked too many questions. Her father never letting her post family details online, even when it seemed harmless. Her father's face tightening whenever a fancy car parked too long on their street. Her father's hands shaking a little when he pressed the ring into hers. "If you ever have nowhere to go, find Bertha at Westbrook." Lydia looked down at her hand. The ring sat there now, heavy and cold, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to become more than jewelry. Patrice watched Lydia gently. "Do you want me to read the letter from the estate attorney out loud?" she asked. "Or do you want to read it yourself?" "Letter. So there really was a letter, the one someone burned." Lydia nodded, barely able to move her head. Patrice turned the page. "This is from the estate attorney," Patrice explained. "He represents your grandfather's legal interests and the trust arrangements linked to your birth family. He's not here in person, but he's available on speaker if you want to ask questions." Samuel had already set the phone on the table. One button, and the attorney could speak into Lydia's life like a judge. Patrice began reading, voice clear. "Miss Lydia Short, if you are reading this, it means the conditions of your protection trust have been activated." Protection trust. Lydia's stomach tightened again. People needed protection from threats, from predators, from families that didn't love they owned. Patrice read the next part slowly, letting it land. "You are the confirmed biological granddaughter of Greg Woodward." The name hit Lydia like a wave. She knew it. Not personally, but the way everyone knew names that lived on buildings and news headlines. Greg Woodward, a billionaire known for building an empire from nothing and for never forgiving cruelty used as power. Lydia's eyes filled, not with joy, not with greed, with grief, because her mother had been close enough to that world to run from it, and Lydia had spent her whole life thinking she was small on purpose. Patrice continued, "You are the only living granddaughter listed under our verified records. Only." Lydia's fingers curled around the paper. Only meant lonely. It meant chosen. It meant responsibility she never asked for. Samuel spoke softly, like he was stepping carefully over broken glass. "Your mother hid you," he said. "Your grandfather respected those terms until the trust's emergency conditions triggered. That's the legal line your mother drew. It held for years." Lydia's heart squeezed. Her mother had fought in a way Lydia never knew. Mr. Short had carried the secret at great cost. Patrice reached the final paragraph and paused, as if even she felt the weight of it. Then she read the sentence that turned Lydia's skin to goosebumps. "Power should arrive only when dignity is stripped." Lydia closed her eyes. Everything clicked. The baby shower humiliation, the fake audit, the cameras, the cards canceled, the locks changed, the shelter drop, the intake notes. They had stripped her dignity to the bone, and the trust this hidden protection had woken up the moment she hit the ground. Lydia opened her eyes and looked at Samuel. "So Vicky burned the letter because she didn't want you to know you had a shield," Samuel finished. "She may not know all the details, but she saw the seal and understood enough to panic." Patrice's eyes sharpened. "Which means we can't assume they'll stop. People who burn evidence usually keep moving." Patrice leaned forward. "Lydia, you have a choice." Lydia stared at her, heart pounding. "Do you want this handled quietly?" Patrice asked, "or publicly?" Quietly would mean safety, maybe. A private settlement. Relocation. Money that arrived without headlines. A shield without noise. Publicly would mean war smears, lies, humiliation doubled. Agnes would call her unstable. Brandon would play the victim. Vicky would twist the story. Lydia felt the baby move again. Steady, stubborn. She thought of the shelter hallway, the thin walls, the women crying at night who never got their chance to speak. She thought of being dumped like she didn't matter. And she realized something hard and clear. If she stayed quiet again, they would rewrite her story for her. Lydia lifted her chin. "Public," she said, voice low but firm. "I won't hide again." Samuel nodded once. Approval and caution mixed. Patrice didn't smile, but her gaze softened with respect. "Then we do it with evidence," Patrice said. "Not emotion. Receipts, timeline, witnesses, clean. If we go public, we file first." Lydia gripped the trust letter like it was a spine being handed back to her. Samuel's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at the screen, and his expression changed fast, tight, alert. "What?" Patrice asked. Samuel turned the phone slightly so Lydia could see the alert from the financial monitor the estate firm had placed as soon as she signed authorization. New transfer attempt detected. Origin, Brandon Knoll's account. Destination, shell entity linked to Vicky Bray. Status, blocked court hold pending. Lydia's breath stopped. Even now, after dumping her at a shelter, Brandon and Vicky were still trying to move money, still hiding something. Patrice's voice dropped to a whisper that felt like thunder. "They're cleaning the scene. They don't know we've already got the trail." Lydia's hand flew to her belly again as the baby kicked hard. Samuel looked at Lydia. "If we act tonight," he said quietly, "we control the story. We file. We speak. We don't give them another day to erase anything else." Lydia stared at the trust letter, then at the frozen transfer alert, heart racing, because now she understood the terrifying truth. They didn't just betray her. They were afraid of what she might become. And when Lydia finally steps into the light, she won't bring tears, she'll bring documents. The doors swung open, and the cameras turned like hungry eyes. Lydia stepped into the courthouse hallway and felt the heat of attention hit her face. Flashbulbs popped, microphones lifted, voices rose all at once, questions thrown like stones. "Lydia, is it true you stole from your husband? Did you cheat? Were you kicked out of your home?" For a split second, Lydia's body wanted to shrink. She was still carrying the weight of the shelter in her bones. She was still heavily pregnant now, closer to 8 months. Her belly was visible proof of everything Brandon had tried to throw away. The baby shifted, and Lydia's hand went there on instinct, steady and protective. But she didn't step back, she stepped forward, because Patrice had warned her, if you hide, they write your story. Patrice walked beside her, calm and firm, holding a slim file folder like a weapon made of paper. Samuel stayed a few steps behind, eyes scanning the crowd. He wasn't there for speeches. He was there to make sure nobody got close enough to shove, grab, or yank her bag. Lydia kept walking. She could see them already across the room near the far wall. Brandon, Agnes, Vicky. They had shown up like this was still their stage. Brandon's face was tight, eyes cold, posture stiff. Agnes stood close to him, like a commander near her soldier. Vicky was slightly behind them, lips pressed into a small smile that looked calm but wasn't. Her eyes flicked to the cameras, measuring, calculating. They thought they would watch Lydia fall again. They didn't know she came with receipts. This wasn't a living room argument. This wasn't a baby shower. This wasn't a shelter intake. This was daylight, public, recorded, ordered. Only this time, Lydia controlled the microphone. Patrice guided her to a simple podium in front of a plain backdrop. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't need to be. The power wasn't in the backdrop. It was in the facts. Lydia looked out at the reporters and observers, people holding notebooks, cameras, and phones. Some looked judgmental, some excited. A few looked ashamed, remembering how quickly they'd believed the first story. Lydia forced her breathing to slow. She remembered the shelter hallway at night, the thin walls, quiet crying, women who had been erased by someone else's version of events. Her baby kicked again steady, like a reminder that she wasn't speaking only for herself now. Patrice leaned in slightly, voice low. We filed already. The petition is stamped. Abandonment, fraud, asset theft, emergency protections. You're not asking for permission. You're announcing what has already begun. Filed first. That mattered. It meant Brandon didn't get to set the narrative in court. Samuel murmured. He's watching you like he can't decide whether to be angry or afraid. Lydia didn't look at Brandon yet. She stepped up to the podium. The hallway noise dropped. Lydia didn't shout. She didn't cry. She spoke like a person who had already survived the hardest part. I was publicly accused of theft, Lydia said, voice steady, at my own baby shower. A small shock ripple ran through the crowd. Some had seen the clips online. Now they were hearing her side. Those accusations were false, Lydia said. Here is the evidence that shows what actually happened. Patrice signaled to a technician. A large screen on a stand beside the podium lit up. Not gossip, not rumors, documents, bank transfer logs, dates, times. Origin accounts marked joint. Destination accounts tied to shell companies. Lydia spoke while the images changed. These are transfers from our shared accounts, she said. Drained in the weeks before that event. The screen flipped. A list of withdrawals. Another image, a simple arrow diagram showing money flowing from household accounts into consulting entity A and service entity B. Underneath, partially blurred for legal reasons but clear enough, were registration records linking those entities to one name, V. Bray. Lydia didn't say Vicky's name yet. She let the evidence speak first. The screen changed again. Short text messages. Brandon's words. Vicky's responses. Brandon, did you move everything? Vicky, yes. She won't notice until it's done. Brandon, good. We'll do the announcement after. A hush fell. Even the reporter stopped murmuring. Lydia's voice stayed level. After that, she said, my bank cards were canceled. My house locks were changed. I was driven and left at a women's shelter. She paused. That is abandonment. Patrice stepped forward and placed a document on the podium, angled so cameras could catch the official court stamp. Divorce petition filed by my client, Patrice said calmly into a different microphone. Abandonment, financial abuse, fraud, emergency support, and housing orders requested. The screen changed again, a photo still from the neighbor's security camera. A hand dropping a half-burned envelope into a trash bin. Lydia's name visible, the estate seal half melted. On the other side of the hallway, a reporter shoved a microphone toward Brandon. With the evidence glowing on the screen behind Lydia, he opened his mouth on instinct, ready to deny, to spin, to explain. But nothing came out. That envelope was addressed to me, Lydia said. It was not theirs to open. It was not theirs to destroy. Now Lydia turned her eyes toward Brandon. His face had lost color. His lips parted slightly. Agnes leaned toward him, whispering sharply, "This isn't possible." but her voice sounded smaller than usual. Vicky took a step back. Not in shock. In calculation. Her eyes moved across the screen, then toward the exits, then toward the nearest camera like she was adding up how much of herself she could still save. Lydia looked back at the reporters. "I am not asking for pity," she said. "I am asking for the truth to be seen. I have cooperated with investigation. I will continue to cooperate with the court." Patrice placed a brief, steadying hand on Lydia's shoulder. Samuel's attention stayed glued to Vicky. Vicky's fingers slid to her phone, quick and subtle. A message, a warning, a plan. Vicky was not the type to lose quietly. As Lydia stepped away from the podium, a reporter shouted one last question louder than the rest. "Lydia, who is your family? Why was there an estate seal on that letter?" The hallway seemed to freeze. Brandon's head snapped up. Agnes stiffened like she'd been slapped. Vicky's eyes narrowed sharply, like she had just realized the one part of the story she hadn't understood. Lydia's heart pounded. The baby kicked hard. Patrice leaned close, voice low and urgent. "Don't answer that here. Not yet. That belongs in court, under oath, where they can't twist it." Lydia swallowed. Because she knew the next fight wasn't about marriage anymore. It was about power and blood. And Brandon, watching her now like he'd never truly seen her, looked terrified of what the court might uncover. And when the courtroom doors close, the truth won't be told in words first. It will be told in signatures, timestamps, and a verdict waiting to drop. The judge's gavel cracked once, and the sound sliced through the courtroom like a final warning. Lydia's whole body tightened. Her hand went to her belly without thinking. The baby shifted, steady but firm, as if even the unborn understood that this room could change everything with a single sentence. Across the aisle, Brandon stared straight ahead, his face stiff and pale. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't performing confidence. The news clip of Lydia's statement had spread fast. The documents had already been filed. Out there, he could bluster. In here, evidence ruled. Agnes sat behind him, clutching her purse too tight, jaw set like she could hold reality back with force. And Vicky sat 2 rows behind them, posture perfect, legs crossed like she was attending a lecture, not a hearing that could crush her. But her eyes were too alert. They moved too much. She kept watching the door like a person already planning her exit. Lydia didn't look at them for long. She looked forward. Because Patrice had told her, in court, emotion is allowed, evidence decides, and Lydia had brought evidence. The courtroom felt colder than the shelter ever had. The shelter was loud with pain. This room was quiet with power. Observers filled the benches, some reporters, some law students, some strangers who had followed the story. Phones were off, cameras were limited, but attention was focused. Lydia sat beside Patrice, shoulders straight, breathing slow. She wore a simple dress and held a small folder in her lap like it was a lifeline. She wasn't there to put on a show. She was there to stand behind the work she had already done. Patrice stood when the judge called the case. The judge didn't smile. The judge didn't frown. The judge looked down at the file like it had already spoken. Lydia could hear the rustle of papers, the scratch of a pen, the faint cough of someone trying not to make noise. Brandon's lawyer stood too, trying to look confident. But his voice came out a little too fast, a little too high, when he started his objections as if he could feel the ground shifting under his client's feet. Brandon didn't look at Lydia. He didn't dare. It wasn't because he felt guilty. It was because he couldn't read her anymore. Lydia used to be predictable, soft, apologetic, a woman he could call too emotional and expect to shrink. Now she sat like someone who'd had her dignity stripped and then given back with documents and signatures. Patrice didn't talk long. She didn't need to. She stood and said one sentence that sounded simple but carried a hammer inside it. "Abandonment during late pregnancy," Patrice began, voice steady, "paired with financial abuse and coordinated fraud." Late pregnancy was medically significant. She had doctor's notes, shelter intake notes, dates. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. Patrice handed over the timeline Lydia had written in scene 6. It was neat, detailed, with names, times, locations, and witnesses. The judge scanned it. Then came the bank records, joint accounts drained before the baby shower, transfers into shell companies linked to Vicky, messages talking about moving everything before the announcement. Then the falsified audit, the spreadsheets, the sent emails, metadata showing they were created on Vicky's laptop, not by a neutral accountant. Then Agnes's signed statement claiming she had seen Lydia take funds and heard Lydia admit it with no date, no context, and no way to make it match the bank data. Then the neighbor's camera still, the burned envelope, Lydia's name, the estate seal, each piece connected to the next like a chain. Brandon's lawyer tried to argue misunderstanding, confusion, emotional reaction. He tried to say Brandon thought Lydia had other money and was acting in anger. The judge lifted a hand. Anger does not justify abandonment, the judge said simply, or fraud. One word kept appearing in the judge's questions. Why? Why did the money need to be moved secretly? Why was Lydia removed from her home without access to funds? Why were false documents created? Brandon's answers didn't match the paper in front of the judge. The judge glanced at Lydia. Miss Short, the judge said, using the name on the file. Do you wish to add anything? Lydia's heart pounded. She rose slowly. Her belly felt heavier. Her hands were steady. She didn't look at Brandon first. She faced the bench. Yes, Lydia said quietly. She didn't scream. She didn't perform. She spoke the way she had at the podium, calm, because the evidence was already shouting for her. I was accused publicly of theft, Lydia said. I was removed from my own celebration and treated like I was nothing. Then my access to money was cut off. My home was locked. I was driven to a shelter and left there. A hush moved through the room. I don't want revenge, she added. I want protection for myself and my child, and I want the record to show what actually happened. The judge nodded once. You may sit, the judge said. Lydia sat. Brandon finally turned his head just enough to see her profile. For the first time, he looked unsure. Not because his conscience had awakened, because he realized she had become someone he could not control. The judge didn't look at Brandon when delivering the decision. That was the cruelest part. Brandon had built his identity around being at the center, being seen, being respected. Now the judge treated him like one file among many. Judgment granted, the judge said. 3 impacts landed like stones dropped in water. Shared assets, frozen under court supervision. Referral to financial crimes investigators. Divorce granted on grounds of abandonment and financial abuse. No long speech, no lecture, just consequences. Brandon's face drained, his mouth opened slightly. He tried to speak. Nothing came out that could change the ink on the page. Guilt wasn't the issue anymore. Proof was. Agnes clutched her purse tighter, eyes darting around the courtroom like she was searching for someone to argue with. But outside her own house, her voice carried no automatic power. Vicky stood slowly. Lydia watched her from the corner of her eye. Vicky smoothed her jacket like she was leaving a boring meeting. Then she walked out. No apology, no explanation, no glance at Brandon, just an exit clean and cold. Brandon turned his head sharply, panic flickering. His hand twitched, like he wanted to call her name. But Vicky didn't turn around. Not once. The courtroom doors closed behind Vicky with a soft click that sounded louder than the gavel. Lydia's stomach tightened, not with fear for herself now, but with the realization that Vicky wasn't leaving because she felt guilty. She was leaving because she was free. Samuel leaned toward Patrice and whispered, just loud enough for Lydia to hear, "She's running. And if she runs, she doesn't just take shame, she takes whatever money and records she managed to pull aside before the freeze." Lydia's heart thumped. Because if Vicky disappeared, she could rewrite herself somewhere else while Brandon took most of the legal hits. And Lydia suddenly needed the answer to one dangerous question. What exactly did Vicky steal, and who was she really working for? And when Lydia finally sees what Vicky left behind, she'll realize the mistress didn't just betray a marriage, she betrayed everyone. The voicemail message was short, but it crushed him. Brandon's phone sat in his hand like a dead weight, screen glowing in the dim room. He had called again another investor, another friend, another person who used to pick up on the first ring. This time the voice on the recording wasn't polite. "Do not contact this number again." The line went dead. Brandon stared at the screen, eyes wide, breathing shallow, as if he couldn't understand how the world he controlled had suddenly stopped answering him. Somewhere far away from him, Lydia sat in silence and didn't feel joy. She felt release. Not the loud kind. The kind that comes when the door finally locks behind danger. Slow down into reflection, calm, victory, emotional release. It had been months since the court hearing. Lydia didn't track time by court dates anymore. She tracked it by feedings, naps, and little socks. She carried her baby daughter in a quiet home she now owned outright through the trust and settlement. Not a mansion, not a palace, just a safe, steady place where the lock belonged to her. The nursery was small but warm, soft light, clean blankets, a chair that no one could move away from her. She wasn't surrounded by luxury, she was surrounded by peace. She had support: Patrice checking in with updates, Samuel sending short emails when something new moved in the investigation, Bertha calling sometimes just to ask, "How are you holding up, honey?" Lydia's life didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt real. She hadn't won because she became rich overnight. She'd won because she refused to stay erased. One afternoon, with the baby asleep against her shoulder, Lydia opened her jewelry box again and looked at the ring, the one her father begged her never to pawn. It wasn't just metal anymore. It was a reminder that her mother had tried to protect her, that Mr. Short had guarded her. That dignity mattered even when no one else respected it. Lydia didn't need revenge to feel strong. She needed truth, and truth had carried her. The final thought settled in her mind like a calm verdict. He thought she was nothing, because she never needed to tell him who she was. Vicky disappeared quickly after court. Not with tears, not with regret, with planning. She sold what she could before the deeper freezes hit. She changed her hair. She changed her online name. She moved 2 states away, then again, but she didn't move as cleanly as she believed. The financial crime investigators and the estate's own analysts followed the money. Not all of it. Vicky was smart, but enough to show a pattern. Shell companies she touched, fake consulting invoices, payments from people connected to one of Greg Woodward's corporate rivals, eager to humiliate his hidden bloodline if it ever surfaced. Samuel explained it to Lydia in simple words over coffee one day. She wasn't just using Brandon, he said. She was useful to other people, feeding them information, moving small amounts, helping them test where the Woodward family was weak. Lydia pictured Vicky's calm face at the baby shower. The way she said, "For success, some people have to be removed." The way she sat in Lydia's chair without shame. Now Vicky had removed herself. She could run, but she couldn't erase all her fingerprints. And the more they uncovered, the clearer it became. Vicky didn't just betray a marriage. She betrayed everyone. Brandon's collapse wasn't one dramatic explosion. It was silence. Calls not returned. Meetings canceled. People too busy. The same co-workers who clapped at the baby shower, who watched Lydia be escorted out, who recorded on their phones, those people vanished from Brandon's life the moment consequences arrived. Nobody wanted to be tied to fraud. Agnes tried to steady him. She still spoke in commands, but her voice didn't bend court orders. It didn't open closed doors. It didn't unfreeze accounts already under investigation. In private, Brandon paced small rented rooms, blaming Lydia out loud even when she wasn't there to hear. He blamed miscommunication, jealousy, bad advice. But blame wasn't the point anymore. Reality was, he lost status. He lost his house. He lost the illusion that he could discard a person and remain untouched. Even Agnes, once so loud, grew quieter. You can't argue with a system that has your own signature on fraudulent papers. Months later, Lydia rocked her baby slowly in the nursery. The case files were in a drawer in another room. The estate documents were in a fireproof box. The ring was back in its small velvet slot. She didn't need to look at them every day. She just needed to remember that she had options now if the world ever turned cold again. Her baby yawned, tiny and soft. Lydia kissed her forehead. "You will never have to beg someone to see your worth," Lydia whispered. Not about money, about love, about basic respect. She still visited the shelter sometimes with Bertha's permission to talk to women who had just arrived, not as a savior, as someone who understood what it felt like to be dropped at those doors with nothing. She didn't tell them she was a billionaire's granddaughter. She told them how she started, with a pen, a timeline, and the decision not to disappear. The quiet strength she'd carried all her life had finally been allowed to stand in the light, and it stayed there. Lydia looked down at her baby and whispered something only the child could hear, something like a promise. Never confuse cruelty with love. Never let anyone else write your story for you. Somewhere far away, Brandon sat with a silent phone and a shrinking circle of people who would still answer him, finally understanding that the woman he dumped at a shelter had not been weak. She had been hidden, and hidden strength, once revealed, doesn't go back into the dark. The investigation into Vicky and the rival company didn't end with Lydia's divorce. It was only getting started, because the next set of documents, already being prepared in another quiet office, would reveal exactly who had helped Vicky climb into Lydia's life in the first place and how close they had come to destroying more than one woman's future. He didn't just betray the woman who saved him, he broke her in ways the world would never forget. After she worked 5 jobs to pay his debts, to feed him, to keep the lights on, while he gambled away their future, he repaid her with bruises, mockery, and betrayal. He dragged her across the living room floor the night she begged him to stop borrowing from loan sharks. He beat her until her lip split, then poured boiling water on her arm for daring to question him. And when she could no longer lift her own bag to work, he stood over her with a cold smile and said, "Sign the divorce papers, Ilara. You're a burden. Chloe and I deserve better." Yes, Chloe, her best friend. The same woman who once held her hand through night shifts and called her sister. Together, they humiliated her in public, calling her the maid who thought she was a wife. They took everything: her home, her dignity, her marriage, leaving her with nothing but scars and silence. But what Marcus never knew, what no one could have imagined, was that the poor woman he threw away carried a secret far greater than their cruelty, a dormant inheritance of $50 billion from a family legacy she never claimed. The woman he beat and discarded would rise not with revenge, but with power. Not with screams, but with silence that would echo across boardrooms and headlines. For sometimes, the one you burn to ashes becomes the fire that lights the world. This is not just a story of betrayal. It is the resurrection of a woman they called worthless, and the reminder that dignity cannot be destroyed, only buried until it learns to rise. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like letting her voice drown again under his laughter. But when you subscribe, you stand beside every woman who worked, bled, and rose again after cruelty. Click that button and in the comments, tell us where you're watching from. Let Ilara, I know she's not alone anymore. The scream came before the crashed glass shattering against the kitchen wall, shards glittering like tears. 5 jobs and you still can't make this place livable? Marcus shouted, veins rising in his neck. You call this marriage? Ilara stood frozen beside the sink, her apron still damp from her night shift. The smell of detergent clung to her hands. Her wrists trembled, but her voice stayed steady. I'm trying, Marcus. I'm doing everything I can. Ilara Hale, 32, a woman with soft eyes hardened by survival. She worked herself to exhaustion 5 jobs. Cleaning offices at dawn, waitressing till midnight, delivering parcels on weekends, tutoring neighborhood kids, and folding clothes at the laundromat between shifts. Every dollar she earned vanished into Marcus's gambling tabs and late bills. Marcus, 35, tall, sharp-featured, wearing the arrogance of a man who once tasted success and couldn't let go of it. His pride was all he had left, and even that was rotting. He paced, slamming a drawer. My friends' wives don't smell like bleach. They don't come home in cheap uniforms. You've turned this house into a morgue. Her eyes watered. If I didn't, we'd be on the street. I paid your last debt to King's Club. You promised no more betting. He sneered. Promises don't feed me, Ilara. Her mind drifted to the hospital room where Marcus lay pale after collapsing from stress. She'd sold her late father's watch, the only thing she had left to pay for his treatment. He had clutched her hand then, whispering, You're my miracle, Ilara. I'll spend the rest of my life repaying you. Now, he hurled that same devotion against her. You're dragging me down. You think working yourself to death makes you a saint? It makes you pathetic. The words struck harder than the glass. Ilara lowered her gaze. Her palms were rough from mopping floors, her back sore from lifting boxes. Yet even now, her first thought was fear not for herself, but for how broken he'd become. Marcus, she whispered, what happened to the man who used to dream with me? He laughed coldly. He woke up. Silence. Then the doorbell rang. Mrs. Langford peeked in, holding an envelope. Rent's 3 weeks late, dear. I need payment tomorrow or... Her eyes darted to Marcus's glare and she quickly retreated. Ilara sank onto a chair, her pulse heavy. She mentally tallied her next shift schedule. Dawn cleaning from 5 to 7, tutoring from 8 to 10, courier drop-offs till 2, laundromat until 6, Diner till midnight. Her entire existence was measured in clock-ins. Marcus's phone buzzed on the table. She caught the name flashing on the screen. C. He snatched it away, face tightening. Who's C? She asked softly. He smiled faintly. Someone who still treats me like a man. The room spun. The kettle whistled behind them, releasing a hiss like boiling anger. He brushed past her shoulder, the contact sharp, intentional. Clean this mess, he said, stepping out. You're good at cleaning, aren't you? Her mind flashed to the night he had lost everything at the casino. She had held his shaking body, whispering, We'll fix it. I'll take another job. He'd wept then, promising, You'll never regret loving me. Now only cruelty remained where love had once lived. Elara pressed her palm over her mouth, holding back a sob. The phone still vibrated on the counter, and curiosity battled terror. She reached for it, then froze, as the lock screen lit again. Hotel Silver Bay Suite 312 confirmed for tomorrow. The phone slipped from her fingers and thudded to the floor. Her breath caught. Tomorrow! The same day she'd planned to surprise him with news the small promotion her diner boss had promised after 3 years of loyalty. But now, a different surprise awaited her. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly, echoing through the cracked window. She didn't know it yet, but the next call would change everything. The scent of perfume wasn't hers. It clung to Marcus's jacket like betrayal with a name. Elara stood frozen in the doorway of their cramped apartment, holding the jacket in both hands, her pulse pounding. The air still held the echo of his slammed door. Marcus had stormed out after another argument, muttering something about business meetings and respect. But this was no meeting. Elara, eyes rimmed red from sleeplessness, looked smaller in the dim light of morning. She had just finished her 5th shift of the week, her diner shoes squeaking from grease and fatigue. Marcus had left early, freshly shaved, in the suit she had ironed at dawn. She inhaled again. The perfume rose and citrus was Chloe's favorite. She dropped the jacket onto the couch, something stiff landing with a dull thud. A hotel keycard. Silver Bay Hotel, Suite 312. Her breath hitched. Her mind reeled back to the previous night, how Chloe had stopped by with croissants, pretending concern. You work too hard, Elara, she'd said softly, brushing a crumb from Elara's arm. You should let Marcus handle things for once. And Marcus, lounging shirtless on the couch, had smiled at Chloe in a way that made Elara's stomach knot. Now the knots turned to fire. She sank onto the couch, staring at the keycard. No, she whispered, shaking her head. Not her, not them. Her mind dragged her 2 years back to the night Chloe had stayed over after Marcus's collapse. 2 years earlier, Elara had been pacing outside the hospital room, her hands trembling. Chloe had wrapped her in a hug, whispering, He's lucky to have you. Any other woman would have left. Marcus had woken later, pale and weak, reaching for Elara's hand. You're my reason, he'd said. Now those words felt like someone else's lie. Elara rose and walked to the small mirror near their door. Her reflection startled her dark circles, cracked lips, tired shoulders. She whispered to the reflection as if to a stranger. You worked 5 jobs for him. You cleaned, delivered, scrubbed, taught, and served while he played cards. Her body trembled, not from weakness, but from awakening. The pieces began to connect: the long phone calls, the locked messages, the sudden business trips. And Chloe's recent distance, the way she stopped answering calls after promising to help Elara with her resume. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message. From Chloe. Don't stress yourself today, honey. Take a nap. Marcus said he'll handle things. Elara's fingers went cold. The words twisted in her chest, Marcus said. Heart racing, she grabbed her bag, slipped the keycard inside, and tied her diner scarf around her wrist like armor. She marched toward the door, but paused. Their wedding photo hung beside it. Marcus, in a tuxedo, her in a thrifted gown. They had looked invincible that day. She remembered the moment after that photo was taken, how he had leaned close, whispering, If I ever hurt you, may I lose everything I own. The vow now mocked her from behind glass. Tears welled but didn't fall. She straightened the frame gently. Then let's see if your vow still stands, she murmured. She opened the door, the morning light hitting her face like judgment. Outside, the city buzzed, indifferent to her heartbreak. Elara gripped her bag tighter, whispering to herself, Suite 312. Her cab pulled away from the curb, the keycard glinting through the zipper gap like a tiny, cruel truth. She didn't know it yet, but what waited behind that hotel door would break more than her heart. The sound of laughter hit her before the sight did. It wasn't the laughter itself, it was the familiarity of it. Chloe's laugh. Ilara froze outside, Suite 312, her breath clouding the air. She'd thought she would knock, confront him, demand truth. But through the half-closed door came giggles, glasses clinking, and Marcus's unmistakable voice saying, "To new beginnings." Her hand trembled on the handle. She pushed. Ilara Hale stood in that doorway, a woman who'd worked 5 jobs just to keep them afloat. Every ounce of fatigue, every sleepless night, every burn on her hands, all of it now mocked her through the scent of champagne and betrayal. Marcus, in a white robe, grinned lazily from the bed. Chloe reclined beside him, draped in sheets like a crown of deceit. The room went silent. Marcus's smirk faltered only for a second. "Ilara?" he said, half amused. "You shouldn't be here." Her voice cracked. "Then where should I be, Marcus? At the diner? The laundry? The jobs that paid for your gambling?" Chloe sat up, eyes wide, feigning innocence. "Ilara, it's not what you think." "Then what is it, Chloe?" Ilara's voice quivered, but it didn't break. "Because from here, it looks like my best friend is in bed with my husband." Marcus laughed, low and cruel. "Don't make a scene. You always loved drama." He poured himself another drink. "You knew it was over long ago. I just didn't say it out loud." Ilara's knees weakened. The world tilted. 3 years earlier, Marcus had been broke but hopeful, sketching plans for a cafe. Ilara had kissed his forehead, whispering, "We'll make it together." She'd used her savings to fund his dream. The night before the opening, he'd held her hand beneath the stars, promising, "If I ever forget what you've done for me, may I lose everything." Now, that promise lay in ashes. Her voice came out as a whisper. "You promised, Marcus." He shrugged. "Promises don't pay rent. You're just not the woman I married anymore." Ilara's tears streaked silently down her face. "Because I worked? Because I carried us?" He sneered. "Because you became small. Look at you. You clean floors. You deliver food. You're embarrassing." She flinched. Then, something inside her, something long buried, cracked open. She looked around the room, the spilled champagne, the scattered rose petals, the luxury she'd never had. Her gaze softened, not with pity, but with realization. He'd never loved her effort, only her submission. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I paid every debt you ever made. I sold my father's heirloom for you. I gave you my everything." He smirked, pulling a folded paper from the nightstand. "And now, you'll give me one last thing. Your signature." She took the paper. Divorce papers. Typed, sealed, ready. "You already had them prepared?" "Of course," he said. "Chloe and I are getting married. She's my new beginning. You were my mistake." Her mind dragged her to their wedding day, Ilara in a second-hand gown. Marcus's hands trembling as he placed a ring on her finger. "Till death do us part," he'd whispered. Now death would have been kinder than this. Ilara's hands shook. "You used me." Marcus leaned in, voice icy. "I tolerated you." She slapped him, not out of rage but heartbreak. The sound echoed through the suite. Marcus stepped back, touching his cheek, smiling cruelly. "That'll cost you." He snapped his fingers. Mr. Kent entered from the balcony, holding a briefcase. "Mrs. Hale," Kent said smoothly, "if you sign now, you'll save yourself from legal trouble. The apartment, the car, all in Marcus's name." Ilara couldn't breathe. Betrayal had a taste metallic and final. She dropped the pen. Marcus sighed, pouring more champagne. "Sign or not, Ilara, you're done. Chloe and I are going to Paris next week." Her vision blurred. She remembered a winter morning, Marcus crying after losing his mother. She'd held him all night. He had whispered then, "You're my only family left." Now that man was gone. Ilara turned, gripping the doorframe. "You'll regret this," she said softly. "Not because I'll hurt you, but because someday you'll see who I really was." Marcus chuckled. "A cleaner? A waitress? A nobody?" Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a new email notification. Subject: Confidential Rousseau Global Trust confirmation. $50 billion asset transfer pending. Her eyes widened. She looked back at him one last time, calm now, almost pitying. He had no idea what he'd just thrown away. And the next email would change everything. The phone slipped from Alara's trembling hand and clattered onto the marble floor. Her breath hitched as the words burned into her vision. $50 billion asset transfer pending. She stood frozen in the empty hotel corridor, mascara streaked, heartbroken but flickering with something unfamiliar possibility. Alara Hale, betrayed wife turned reluctant heiress, now stood at the crossroads between ruin and revelation. Her clothes still smelled faintly of bleach and diner oil, the uniform of survival. Behind her, the laughter of Marcus and Chloe still echoed in her ears. Ahead, a single email that could rewrite her entire existence. Alara's shaking fingers scrolled down the message. The sender, Harrison and Adkins LLP. Dear Miss Rousseau Hale, we have attempted to contact you regarding the activation of your late great-uncle Alistair Rousseau's trust. Please respond immediately to confirm your inheritance. The name Rousseau made her chest tighten. She whispered, It can't be. 20 years earlier, a teenage Alara sat by the window of a modest house, listening to her parents argue quietly. Her father, Thomas Rousseau, once heir to the sprawling Rousseau empire, stood in the doorway with a single suitcase. I'm walking away from it all, he said to Martha. Money builds walls. Love builds homes, Martha had replied. Then promise you'll teach her to Desphanic. Live without bitterness. Thomas smiled at young Alara. One day, if life tests you, remember, dignity is the inheritance no one can steal. Now, those words resurfaced like sunlight through storm clouds. Dignity is the inheritance no one can steal. Alara pressed her palm to her chest, tears blurring her sight. The betrayal, the humiliation, they suddenly felt smaller beside the legacy she'd forgotten she carried. She sat on a bench in the hotel lobby, heart heavy but steadying. Why had she stayed with Marcus so long? Because she'd believed love was duty, that patience would fix everything. But now she understood patience without respect becomes chains. She remembered every time she'd told herself one more chance, every time she'd mopped tears from the same floor she mopped spills. She realized that her suffering wasn't weakness, it was evidence of loyalty misused. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from the law firm. Please call at your earliest convenience. The trustees are awaiting confirmation. Alara inhaled deeply, glancing at her reflection in the glass door. For the first time in years, she didn't see a tired wife. She saw the daughter of Thomas Rousseau, a woman who could rebuild from ashes. She whispered, maybe this is how it ends. Not with revenge, but revelation. Her phone rang a foreign number. She answered hesitantly. Miss Hale, a calm voice said, this is Mr. Harrison from Harrison and Adkins LLP. We've been expecting your call. When can you come to Geneva? Alara froze. Geneva. The name shimmered like destiny. She glanced once more toward the hallway leading to Suite 312, toward the ghost she was leaving behind. Then, softly, booked the flight. As she ended the call, her phone buzzed again, this time a message from Marcus. You're nothing without me. Don't ever forget that. Alara looked at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the message with one swipe. But soon, the man who said she was nothing would learn she owned everything. The private jet door sealed shut with a hiss. For the first time in her life, Alara wasn't cleaning the floors of a plane, she was sitting in one. Alara, widow in spirit though not by law, sat by the window clutching a sealed envelope embossed with the Rousseau family crest. Her face was pale from sleeplessness, but her eyes burned with quiet fire. Across from her sat Mr. Harrison, 55, immaculate in a charcoal suit, the kind of man whose calm could steady a storm. Outside, the night sky unfolded like dark velvet. The hum of the engines filled the silence between them. Alara hadn't spoken since takeoff. She simply held the envelope, afraid that opening it would make everything too real. Mr. Harrison broke the silence. Mrs. Hale, she flinched. Just Alara, he nodded politely. Alara, your great-uncle Alistair Rousseau left instructions that the inheritance remains, sealed until you verify identity in person. He believed wealth means little without wisdom. Her brows furrowed. I didn't even know he existed. Mr. Harrison smiled faintly. He knew of you. Your father was the only Rousseau who chose love over empire. Alistair admired that courage. 10 years earlier, Elara sat in her mother's kitchen, the air thick with fried onions and frustration. Her mother Martha tossed a letter into the sink, lighting a match. "We don't need their charity," she'd said as flames consumed the embossed crest. Elara had wanted to ask who they were, but fear of reopening old pain had kept her silent. Now she understood the Rousseaus hadn't vanished. They'd waited. She turned to the window, watching the clouds pass beneath them. The woman in the reflection didn't look like the one who scrubbed hotel floors. She looked like someone remembering her name. "Why me?" she whispered. Mr. Harrison's gaze softened. "Because, despite what life took from you, you never stopped giving." That was his measure of worth. Her throat tightened. "Marcus said I was worthless." "Then Marcus," he said evenly, "will learn the cost of ignorance." Elara exhaled, releasing years of held breath. "What happens when we land?" "You'll review the trust documents," Harrison replied, "and you'll sign under your full name, Elara Rousseau Hale." She touched the envelope, tracing the seal. "And after that? That depends on whether you want to build or burn." Elara hesitated, then tore the envelope open. Inside was a single handwritten note from her late great-uncle. "For every debt you paid that wasn't yours, this is your freedom returned. For every hand that struck you, this is your justice restored. Do not seek revenge, child. Build something they can never buy your name." A tear slipped down her cheek. She folded the letter carefully, whispering, "I will." As the plane began its descent toward Geneva, her phone vibrated unknown number. She almost ignored it, until she saw the preview. "You think you've escaped me? Check your bank account." Marcus. Her stomach tightened. She opened her banking app. Balance, $0. The screen dimmed as the plane wheels touched down. But what Marcus had stolen in greed, destiny was about to return in magnitude. The ATM screen blinked twice before spelling her downfall. Balance, $0. Elara's knees almost gave out right there on the polished Geneva floor. Elara stood inside the grand marble lobby of the Adkins Global Bank, the same institution where her inheritance was supposed to arrive. Her reflection in the golden elevator doors looked ghost-like, lips trembling, hands gripping her phone. Beside her stood Mr. Harrison, calm as a storm contained in a glass. His silver tie pin glimmered under the chandelier. "Marcus did this," Elara whispered, her voice cracking. "He drained what of gold little I had left before the flight." Harrison checked his watch. "Then he's already panicking. People like him always act out before they fall." She blinked back tears. "But how can someone still hurt you after you've left them?" He gave a faint smile. "Because they haven't realized they've already lost you." They stepped into the meeting chamber. The room was vast crystal windows overlooking Lake Geneva. At the far end, Lucienne Adkins, the formidable chairwoman, sat waiting. Her gray hair was perfectly styled, her presence commanding. "Elara Rousseau Hale," Lucienne said, voice smooth as marble. "We've been expecting you. Please sit." Elara sat, palms damp, still clutching the phone that showed her empty balance. Lucienne's gaze flicked to the screen. "He emptied your personal account?" Elara nodded wordlessly. Lucienne leaned back. "Then perhaps it's poetic that you are here, today, signing documents that will make that man's theft look like pocket change." Harrison slid a folder forward. Inside lay the Rousseau trust deed, embossed with the crest her mother once burned. Elara's hands trembled as she read her name beside words she'd never imagined seeing. Primary beneficiary. Total value, $50 billion. 6 months earlier, Elara stood outside a pawn shop, rain soaking through her shoes. She had just sold her wedding necklace, the one Marcus gave her. He'd said it was for a temporary loan. She'd smiled, believing him. Now that memory hit her like a bruise resurfacing. Return to present. Tears welled, but not from weakness. From realization. Every humiliation had been preparing her for this moment. Lucienne's voice softened. "Mr. Rousseau left specific instructions, my dear. You're not just inheriting wealth. You're inheriting control over the Rousseau Global Trust, the foundation, and every affiliated holding. You'll need to decide how to use it." Elara exhaled, steady, for the first time. "I'll use it to build, not destroy." Lucienne nodded approvingly. "Spoken like your father. Middle, Emotional reflection? Ilara traced her name on the document. In that silent act, the woman who once begged for coins became the woman who would decide fates. Harrison leaned closer. Once you sign, the transfer activates in 24 hours. Marcus will never be able to touch a cent again. Her lips curved faintly. Good. Let him feel what nothing really means. She signed. The pen scratched history onto paper. Seconds later, Harrison's phone buzzed. He frowned, reading the message aloud. Emergency alert. Unauthorized attempt to access Rousseau Holdings traced to Ohio, USA. Ilara's pulse quickened. Marcus. Her expression hardened, grief turning into quiet fury. Then let's make sure he learns what he just tried to steal from. Because the next move wouldn't be defense, it would be war. The call came at 2:14 a.m., Geneva time. When Ilara answered, all she heard at first was laughter, his laughter. Ilara Hale, newly reinstated heiress of the Rousseau legacy, stood barefoot in the middle of her hotel suite overlooking Lake Geneva. She wore a silk robe, provided by the bank, a luxury that still felt alien on her skin. But the voice on the phone dragged her straight back to the nightmare she'd escaped. Marcus Hale, her ex-husband, and the man who had drained her last savings before she learned she was worth billions. Her reflection in the glass was split, one part the woman he broke, the other the woman he no longer knew existed. Didn't think I'd find your number that fast, did you? Marcus sneered over the line. You think you can run off with my money? Ilara's voice was steady. Your money? He chuckled darkly. What's yours was mine, sweetheart. Don't forget that. I made you. Without me, you're nothing. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Funny, she whispered. That's exactly what you'll be soon. 3 years earlier, Marcus sat at their kitchen table surrounded by gambling slips and empty bottles. Ilara, you don't understand pressure, he'd snapped, tearing at his hair. If you love me, you'll fix it. And she had. She'd picked up another job that same night, the 5th one, while he slept. Now, standing by the window in Geneva, Ilara could still see that same darkness in his voice. Only this time, she wasn't the one trembling. Marcus continued, voice dripping venom. You'll regret walking away. You'll come crawling back when no one else wants you. Ilara smiled faintly, a smile he couldn't see. Marcus, I'm done crawling. You just can't see how far I've risen. She ended the call. Silence flooded the suite. Only the faint hum of city lights remained. Moments later, a knock. It was Mr. Harrison, crisp in a navy suit despite the hour. I assume you've heard from him? He asked. Ilara nodded. He called to remind me who I used to be. And what did you say? She met his gaze. That I'm not her anymore. Harrison gave a rare approving smile. Good, because tomorrow the transfer completes. Once it does, we begin phase 2, ensuring your assets are invisible and his every theft is traceable. Lucienne entered, holding a thin file. Our digital forensics team located his attempt to breach the trust servers, she said. He used an American IP routed through an old bank account in both your names. He's just committed international fraud. Ilara's pulse slowed, not in fear, but in realization. His downfall had already begun. She walked toward the window again. The reflection of her own face hovered over Geneva's lights, strong, poised, unrecognizable. For years she'd been running toward survival. Now she was standing still, letting justice catch up. Mr. Harrison's phone buzzed again. He glanced down and frowned. It's from our security team, he said quietly. Marcus isn't alone. He's working with someone on the inside of your old circle. Ilara's heartbeat quickened. Who? Lucienne flipped the file open. A photograph slid out. Chloe Rivers, smiling, standing beside Marcus. Ilara's fingers curled into fists. The betrayal had doubled. And this time, she wouldn't confront them with tears, but with power they couldn't comprehend. Ilara stared at the surveillance photo, Chloe's manicured hand resting on Marcus's chest. Her best friend, her betrayer, her echo. In a glass-walled conference room high above Geneva, Ilara Hale sat between Mr. Harrison and Lucienne Adkins. Her face was unreadable, not numb, not angry, simply resolved. The city lights glittered beneath them, but the table before her was covered in documents, printouts, and transfer records. Lucienne leaned forward. You've been wronged publicly and privately. What you do next determines who you become. Ilara's eyes flicked up. Then I choose to become unforgettable. Mr. Harrison placed a slim tablet in front of her, displaying Marcus and Chloe's recent movements, hotel check-ins, bank attempts, digital traces. They're moving fast, he said. But not smart. Alara scanned the data. They're using accounts tied to my old business filings, the cleaning contract company I registered years ago. Harrison smiled faintly. Good memory. We can use that. We'll let them believe they've breached the real Rousseau holdings. Lucienne's eyes narrowed. You want to bait them? Alara nodded. They've built their confidence on my silence. I'll use it one last time as a weapon. 2 years earlier, Chloe had handed Alara a cup of coffee, laughing. When Marcus finally wins that deal, we'll celebrate together, just us girls. Alara had smiled, trusting her. You're my sister, Chloe. You'd never hurt me. Chloe's eyes had softened or pretended to. Never. Now, in the sterile glow of the conference room, that word never played like a haunting refrain. Alara exhaled slowly. She was the first person to call after my miscarriage, she murmured, voice low. The only one who told me to let Marcus rest. Now I see what she meant. Lucienne folded her arms. Then let them rest in the ruin they've built. Alara leaned back in her chair, eyes glistening but firm. For years I cleaned floors that weren't mine, paid debts that weren't mine. Now, I'll collect what truly belongs to me, not through rage, but through justice. Harrison nodded. Then we begin the mirror plan. He slid a thin black binder across the table. Inside were schematics of financial decoys, media trails, and encrypted accounts. Within 48 hours, Marcus and Chloe will think they've gained access to $500 million. Every dollar will be traced, every email logged. When they attempt transfer, Alara finished the line. The law will meet them first. Lucienne smiled faintly. You've learned fast. Alara's gaze hardened. Pain is the best teacher. Just as Harrison gathered the files, Alara's phone buzzed again, a new email alert. Subject, to my wife, one last chance. Sender, Marcus Hale. She opened it. Inside was a single line. I know where you are, Alara, and I'm coming. Alara looked out the window, the moon reflected like steel in her eyes. He didn't know it yet, but he was walking straight into her trap. The elevator doors slid open, and Marcus Hale walked straight into the trap he thought he set. He didn't recognize the woman waiting for him, not until she said his name. Alara Hale stood at the center of the boardroom of Rousseau Global, now fully hers. She wore a tailored ivory suit, hair pinned back, a quiet storm behind her eyes. Mr. Harrison stood, slightly behind, arms folded. Lucienne to her right, the silent witnesses of an empire reclaimed. Marcus, disheveled from travel, stepped in wearing yesterday's arrogance, the kind that only survives until it meets truth. His once sharp eyes darted across the polished marble floor, unsettled by how her presence filled the room. Alara? He started, smirking faintly. You're really going to ignore me after everything we've… You mean after everything you've done? She cut in, voice low, slicing through the air like glass. He laughed, but it trembled. You don't understand, baby. Chloe, she tricked me. It was always you. Lucienne's lip curved. Typical, she murmured. Marcus turned toward her, offended. And who the hell are you? Alara's ally, Lucienne replied calmly. Something you never were, he scoffed, stepping closer to Alara. You can't keep all this money. Half of it was earned while we were married. The law's on my side. Alara turned, meeting his gaze without blinking. Marcus, the law was your weapon. Now it's my shield. Flashback trigger, the courtroom promise 3 years earlier. Marcus had stood before the judge, holding her hand just long enough for the cameras to click. Everything I do, he'd said, smiling for the press, is for my wife. Later that night, he drained their joint account, returned to present. Now that same hand, the one he'd used for vows and theft, trembled at his side. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. Look, maybe we got lost for a while. Maybe I let the money change me. But we can start over. I know you still love me. Alara tilted her head slightly, studying him. Love isn't the issue, she said softly. Memory is. I remember everything. He swallowed. I was scared, Alara. I thought you'd never forgive me. Her tone was gentle, dangerously so. Forgiveness doesn't mean return. She gestured, subtly toward Harrison. A file slid across the table toward Marcus. He opened it bank statements, forged transfers, screenshots of his messages to Chloe. His face drained of color. What is this? Your confession, Alara said. Signed in advance. What? Harrison's voice was steady. Every step you've taken was monitored. Every lie recorded. You walked yourself into indictment. Marcus staggered back. You set me up. Alara met his eyes, and for a brief second, there was something like pity. No, Marcus. You set yourself up. I just stopped cleaning up your mess. He lunged forward, rage breaking through fear, but Lucienne stepped between them, unflinching. Security moved in silently. As they dragged him away, Marcus shouted, You'll regret this, Alara. You'll regret everything. She didn't flinch, only whispered to herself, Regret is your inheritance, not mine. Moments after the door shut, Alara's phone buzzed. Unknown. Number. Message. Check your Geneva account. Someone else has already moved the funds. Her chest tightened. Harrison. It wasn't Marcus. There's another player. Lucienne's eyes narrowed. And this one might actually be dangerous. Outside, the city lights flickered as if the storm had just begun. But the next face she'd confront would rewrite everything she thought she knew about betrayal. The screen flickered, and Chloe's voice filled the room. Miss me, Alara? Alara Hale stood in the dimmed control center of Rousseau Global's security suite, flanked by Harrison and Lucienne. The monitors glowed cold blue, casting long shadows across their faces. The air was heavy, sterile, electric with disbelief. Mr. Harrison's jaw tightened. That voice file shouldn't exist. She's locked out of every system. Lucienne folded her arms, eyes narrowing. Unless someone on the inside let her back in. Alara stared at the audio waveform pulsing. Across the central screen, her pulse echoing with it. Play the rest, she ordered. Chloe's tone oozed through the speakers, honeyed and venomous. You always had the looks, Alara. The sympathy. But I had the instinct. And while you rebuilt your life with lawyers and contracts, I rebuilt mine with your inheritance. Rousseau was never meant for you, it was meant for those who could fight for it. Lucienne's brow furrowed. She's taunting you. No, Alara murmured. She's warning me. 4 years earlier, Chloe had raised a glass at Alara's engagement dinner. To the woman who deserves everything she dreams of, she'd said, tears in her eyes. Marcus had smiled then, touching Alara's back with feigned tenderness. Chloe's hand brushed his as she passed by. It was fleeting, but now, remembering, Alara saw it for what it was. An omen. The room felt colder. Harrison turned toward her. This isn't just theft. Chloe's coordinating an attack on Rousseau's infrastructure identity, banking, data streams. She's trying to erase your holdings before the legal transfer finalizes. Lucienne tapped a monitor. See this? 2 signatures on the last Geneva withdrawal, Marcus and Chloe, but the override key belongs to someone else. Alara froze. Who? Lucienne hesitated. It came from inside Rousseau Global. The word inside hit like thunder. Harrison's fingers flew over the keyboard. He brought up a terminal log. An access ID flashed on screen. Hail-director@rousseau.com. Alara's heart stopped. That's my father's account. Lucienne looked sharply at her. You said your father passed 15 years ago. He did. Harrison's voice was grave. Then someone resurrected him digitally, which means Chloe has access to legacy codes. Alara's hands trembled, the first crack in her composure since this all began. How? Lucienne met her eyes. Because your father's estate executor sold the archives. Chloe must have bought them. Alara backed away from the screen, eyes misting. The image of her father, kind, distant, brilliant, flickered in her mind. He'd trusted the world she was now fighting. I used to believe betrayal came from the heart, she said softly. But this is betrayal, written in code. Harrison stepped closer. Then you'll have to learn to speak its language. She nodded, wiping her tears. Then teach me. A new message appeared on the main monitor. Encrypted, origin unknown. Alara hesitated, then opened it. Subject: Inheritance Reversal Protocol activated. Attachment: Video feed 01. MP4. The feed loaded grainy footage from a parking garage. Chloe stood beside a black sedan, and from the passenger side, stepping into frame, Was Mr. Adkins Lucienne's husband? Lucienne's breath caught. No, that's impossible. Ilara's gaze darkened. Then we're not just fighting outsiders anymore. And in that moment, Ilara understood the final betrayal was still waiting to reveal its face. Lucienne staggered back, eyes wide. That's my husband, Ilara. Inside Rousseau Global's high-security room, Ilara stood frozen before the looping video feed. Lucienne, her trusted ally and financier, trembled as her husband's face stared back from the screen, standing beside Chloe Rivers, the woman who had already stolen one life's worth of trust. Mr. Harrison remained silent, arms folded, watching both women. His expression held the uneasy calm of a man who had seen too many betrayals unfold like clockwork. Ilara replayed the clip again. Mr. Adkins handed Chloe a folder stamped confidential, inheritance structure. His voice, though muffled by static, was unmistakable. Once it's transferred, she'll have nothing left. Ilara won't even see it coming. Lucienne clutched the edge of the table. No, that can't be him. He wouldn't. Her. The voice broke. Ilara's tone was quiet, steady but laced with pain. He already did. Lucienne turned, eyes brimming. You think I knew about this? You think I don't know what to think anymore, Ilara whispered. Every person I've trusted has had a price. Harrison stepped forward. We need to move now. If Chloe's working with Mr. Adkins, your inheritance network is compromised. Geneva's just the beginning. Lucienne's breathing grew shallow. He's been distant for months. Late meetings, secret trips. I thought it was business. Ilara looked at her, voice softer. That's what I thought about Marcus. Years earlier, Ilara had stood in the pouring rain with Marcus, clutching her soaked bouquet. You'll never face anything alone, he'd said, brushing her hair from her face. Now she could still feel that same chill, the kind that comes when promises dissolve into lies. Ilara turned to Harrison. Can we trace where this was filmed? He nodded, typing rapidly. Zurich, 3 days ago. The transaction's already in motion. Lucienne, trembling, whispered. He said he was in Dubai for negotiations. Ilara exhaled, eyes burning with a mixture of grief and control. Then Zurich is where this ends. She reached for her coat. Harrison tried to stop her. Ilara, if you confront them now, her voice cut through his warning. They think I'm still the woman who begged for love. Let's show them who I became instead. Before they could move, the lights flickered. The monitors went black. Then one line of text appeared in blood-red font across every screen. Too late, Ilara. Check your accounts. Lucienne gasped. Harrison began typing frantically. Ilara stood still, eyes locked on the glowing words. Then came the final blow, a notification ping. Rousseau Global Balance. $0. Ilara whispered. They took everything. But what Chloe didn't know was that Ilara had already hidden something money could never buy. The wedding march stopped mid-note. Every head turned as the doors swung open and Ilara stepped inside, cloaked in crimson and vengeance. Ilara Hale stood at the back of the Grand Adkins Estate ballroom, her gown shimmering like fire beneath crystal chandeliers. The crowd froze, sensing danger cloaked in elegance. At the altar, Marcus stiffened. The color drained from his face. Chloe clutched his arm, whispering, Marcus, who is that? His answer came out strangled. You? Ilara's heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing through the silent hall. She carried a single leather portfolio, the same shade as her gown. Relax, she said softly, her voice steady, deliberate. I'm only here to deliver something you forgot. Marcus forced a smirk. You shouldn't be here, Ilara. This isn't your place anymore. She stopped before the altar. It is when every brick of this place was bought with my work. The guests gasped. Cameras tilted. Even the string quartet stilled. Ilara placed the portfolio gently on the altar. Invoices. Every cent of your debts. Every late-night payment, every lawyer's call, every collector's threat. Paid. By me. She opened the folder. Crisp documents gleamed under the lights, each signed by Marcus himself. You married me for stability, you used me for rescue, and you left when you thought I was spent. 2 years earlier, Ilara sat at a diner counter under flickering light, counting bills until her fingers shook. Marcus kissed her hair. We'll make it through this, he promised. You're my whole world. Now, standing before him, she saw the irony he'd traded that world for a lie. Marcus's jaw clenched. You think you can humiliate me here? I don't need to, she said. You've already done it yourself. She turned to Mr. Adkins. But perhaps you'd like to see the rest. Harrison's? Courier stepped forward, handing Mr. Adkins a sealed envelope. The old man opened it slowly, dread tightening his grip. Inside, forged loan guarantees under Adkins Capital, Marcus's signature replicated across falsified documents. The crowd gasped as Mr. Adkins's face paled. You? Forged my name? Chloe whispered, shaking. Marcus, tell me that's not true, Marcus stammered. I just needed time. Mr. Adkins slammed the papers onto the altar. Time? You stole from me. Ilara's voice was calm, almost compassionate. You stole from everyone who believed in you. Marcus's mask broke. You'll regret this, Ilara. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. I already did. Once. The ballroom doors burst open. Two men in dark suits entered, flashing badges. Marcus Hale, one said. You're under arrest for fraud and identity forgery. Gasps rippled. Cameras flashed. Chloe fainted. Ilara turned away, unflinching. Her voice, quiet but cold, echoed through the silence. Some debts aren't paid with money, but as the cuffs clicked shut, none of them saw the figure in the balcony, the one watching Ilara with chilling interest. Marcus Hale, did you really forge international documents under Adkins Capital? The questions sliced through the chaos as cameras flashed like lightning. Marcus stood in the center of the ballroom, his tuxedo disheveled, wrists bound by steel cuffs. His perfect facade was gone, replaced by sweat, fear, and fury. Beside him, Chloe Rivers crumpled to her knees, mascara streaking down her face, the same red lipstick from Scene 2 now smeared across her trembling lips. At the edge of the chaos, Ilara Hale watched, calm, still, regal in crimson. Her silence was the loudest sound in the room. Security pushed Marcus toward the marble staircase as reporters swarmed. Questions flew like daggers. Was your marriage a fraud? How long were you stealing from Rousseau? Global? Is it true your wife paid your debts? Marcus snapped. You all believed her little act? She's no saint. She's Mr. Adkins's thunderous voice cut through. Enough. The crowd parted as he stepped forward, his face carved in fury. Adkins Industries withdraws all partnerships effective immediately. His tone was final like a judge's gavel. Chloe gasped. Father, please. He didn't even look at her. You disgrace this family. Chloe's sobs turned to hysteria. You used me, Marcus. You promised me everything. Marcus jerked against the guards, veins pulsing. You used everyone, me, her, your father, just to climb. The crowd's noise swelled, phones filmed. Every secret, every sin was now permanent. 2 years earlier, Chloe and Marcus in the parking lot of Ilara's second job, their shadows pressed together under the neon light. She'd whispered, she'll never know. Now, under the flashing bulbs of public shame, that whisper had become a curse. Chloe's red lipstick, once her symbol of confidence, bled across her face like evidence. The crowd whispered. The irony was cinematic. The shade she'd stolen from Ilara's vanity now marked her fall. Marcus screamed as he was pulled away. You'll regret this, Ilara. Ilara met his eyes once, unflinching. I already did. A journalist broke through the noise. Miss Hale, one question, he shouted. Are you confirming ownership of the Rousseau Global Trust, the $50 billion inheritance? Ilara turned toward the flashing cameras, her crimson gown gleaming like justice. She smiled faintly. Yes, but wealth means nothing without peace. The crowd erupted. Cameras froze on her calm face. And from the far end of the hall, a shadowed figure, Chloe's father, watched her with unreadable eyes. But peace was never meant to come easy. Please, Ilara. I'm ruined. Marcus fell to his knees on the marble floor of Rousseau Global Headquarters, tears streaking through his stubble. Ilara Hale, now in an ivory suit, stood behind the sleek glass podium of her empire. The Rousseau crest gleamed behind her, the symbol of the legacy he tried to steal. Cameras clicked like gunfire as Marcus, once her tormentor, now looked like a man dragged through his own lies. Mr. Harrison stood beside her, A silent pillar as reporters whispered and the world watched. Marcus's voice cracked. Ilara, I've lost everything. My home, my name. They froze all my accounts. Please, you won. Take me back, the crowd murmured. The microphones caught every tremor in his words. Ilara's gaze softened not out of pity, but recognition. Marcus, she said, voice even, I didn't win. I just stopped losing. Her words hung in the air like a verdict. She turned to the document in front of her. With calm precision, she signed it. A reporter read the digital projection aloud. Transfer of $2 million to the Hale Debt Relief Foundation, a nonprofit aiding victims of predatory loans. Ilara looked at Marcus. Consider it closure, she said quietly. For every debt I once paid in your name. 7 years earlier. A dim apartment. Young Ilara sat cross-legged on the floor, counting coins into neat piles while Marcus scrolled through betting apps. Just this once, he'd said. We'll fix it together. She'd smiled, trusting. Now, as she watched the transaction finalize on the massive LED screen, she felt that old ache dissolve, replaced by peace. Marcus stumbled closer. You still love me, don't you? The question silenced the room. Ilara met his eyes, no anger, no bitterness, only truth. I love the man you could have been, she said. But he died the day you poured boiling water on the woman who fed you. Gasps rippled, cameras flashed. Marcus's face twisted in shame. Ilara, please. Before he could reach her, 2 uniformed officers stepped forward. The lead officer spoke calmly. Marcus Hale, you are under arrest for fraud, identity forgery, and aggravated assault under reopened case number 2239R. He froze. The cuffs clicked. The same sound echoed from that night years ago, but now it was justice, not fear. Ilara's expression didn't change. She simply whispered, freedom doesn't always come quietly. As Marcus was let out, his final look wasn't hate, it was realization. The woman he had tried to destroy had learned not just to fight, but to forgive without surrender. Reporters surged forward again. Miss Hale, what's next for Rousseau Global? One shouted. Ilara turned slightly toward the window, city lights gleaming below. Restoration, she said. But peace. Peace is never free. And that night, as the world called her victorious, a sealed letter on her desk waited one that could change everything again. The ribbon trembled in her hands. For a heartbeat, Ilara thought she might cry. But then the cameras flashed, and she smiled. Welcome to the Rousseau Foundation, she said, where women learn the power they were told they never had. Ilara stood on the steps of the glass-fronted building, sunlight cascading behind her like a spotlight. The foundation's gold crest shimmered above the doors. Rousseau Foundation for Women's Financial Literacy. Beside her, Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses, proud but humbled, while Martha, her mother, clutched a handkerchief and whispered, Your father would be so proud. A gentle wind stirred, carrying applause through the crowd. Ilara approached the podium. Microphones extended. The press fell silent. 2 years ago, she began softly, I was counting coins at midnight, trying to pay another person's debt. I thought love meant saving someone else's dream while mine disappeared. A murmur rippled through the guests. Ilara's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed. Steady. Don't measure your worth by who walked away, but by what you built after. Behind her, an exhibit gleamed in the lobby, a single framed $50 bill, the one she had once handed Marcus to cover his gambling debt. Beneath it, a small plaque read, Not my worth. She remembered the cold apartment, the flickering bulb, Marcus shouting about overdue bills. She'd reached into her purse, offered that last crumpled note. He'd sneered, $50? That's all you're good for? Now that same note rested under glass, a relic of pain transformed into power. Tears shimmered in her mother's eyes. You didn't just rebuild, Ilara, Martha whispered. You redefined. Ilara smiled faintly. Maybe that's what survival really is. Mom redefining what they tried to destroy. Reporters surged forward with questions, but she didn't flinch. The moment belonged not to spectacle, but to silence one she had earned. Across the street, half hidden, by a lamppost Marcus watched. His suit hung loose, his face pale and unreadable. No cameras turned toward him, no microphones reached. just his gaze, remorseful, distant, defeated. Elara caught sight of him. For a moment, the world blurred, not with hate, not with love, but with closure. She gave him a faint nod, forgiveness without return. Then she turned away, extending her hand to greet a line of young women holding scholarship folders, the future she had built from ashes. The crowd erupted in applause as golden confetti rained down. "Silence isn't weakness," Elara said into the microphone, her voice steady as glass. "It's the sound of strength learning when to speak." But even strength, she knew, had one more test waiting beyond the applause.